Chapter 96. October 1st, National Day. 9 o'clock in the morning. The sky on this day was impeccably blue and intoxicatingly beautiful. Chun-Shi moved a table from the main hall to the courtyard, then went to the west wing to move the TV to the window, facing the inner courtyard. Because he didn't buy any groceries, he bought breakfast from a snack stall outside. Porridge, steamed buns, and 2 or 3 side dishes. It was a very ordinary breakfast. The little girl didn't eat steamed buns, so Chun-Shi had to buy her 2 bean paste buns. After Chun-Shi turned on the TV, the little girl sat on a small stool, watching TV while holding a bean paste bun. Maybe it was because the taste of the bean paste bun was very ordinary. Moreover, she was spoiled by Chun-Shi's cooking skills, so after a few bites, she started to pick at it. After licking the bean paste bun, the little girl decisively threw the rest of the dough to the big cat. The big cat stuck its head out and bit the bean paste bun thrown by the little girl. Because there was still some bean paste on it, it also ate the part that was stained with bean paste first. But after all, it was the little girl's leftovers, so the big cat only licked the bean paste twice before it was gone, so it had to chew the white flour. But after chewing 2 mouthfuls of the white flour, he spat it out just like the little one. Seeing this, Chun-Shi could only shake his head and sigh. The child's appetite had been raised by him. Maybe it was because she was tired of eating bean paste. The little girl licked her lips. Today, she didn't wait for Chun-Shi to serve her and took the initiative to hold the bowl and eat the porridge. This 2-part courtyard house was very large. The area was at least 400 square meters. There were 17 rooms, not to mention the 2 courtyards in the front yard and the inner courtyard. Because of the spirit cultivation pill, the little girl's eyesight was very good. Even sitting in the middle of the courtyard, she could clearly see the TV screen in the window of the west wing. However, perhaps because it was too far away, the volume of the TV wasn't very high. After eating her fill, she moved a small stool and sat on the steps outside the west wing. She raised her small head and looked at the TV above her. She almost stuck her small face to it. The military parade had not officially started yet. It was time for the guests from various countries to enter. When the little fellow went out to buy breakfast with Chun-Shi in the morning, she heard others talking about today's military parade. Although she didn't know what a military parade was, her interest was still aroused. So when she saw the live broadcast on TV, she was a little excited. As Chun-Shi tidied up, he looked at her silly expression and couldn't help but laugh. After cleaning up the garbage on the table, Chun-Shi moved a recliner to sit under the steps, and then called the little fellow over. Hearing this, the little guy immediately jumped into Chun-Shi's arms. She giggled as she rubbed against Chun-Shi's chest a few times. Then she turned over and laid in his arms to watch TV. The National Day military parade was not held every year. The last one was in 2009. After many years, the National Day military parade was finally held again, so the people in Shangjing were very excited. In the old alleys and on the streets, they gathered in groups of 3 or 5. One of them was holding a mobile phone ready to watch the live broadcast, and a few people behind him were chatting. Some impatient people had already climbed to the roof, ready to see the fighter jets that would fly over their heads later. Because of the importance of the military parade, martial law had been implemented around Tiananmen Square as early as a day ago. All the schools and units near Chang'an Street had to be closed. All the office buildings on Chang'an Street had to be closed. The curtains on the side of the hotel facing Chang'an Street must be drawn. During the ceremony, they must not be opened without permission. In addition, some residents living near Tiananmen Square would also be evacuated. The government would pay for them to live in hotels, and the army would check the safety of each building one by one to ensure that nothing would happen during the military parade. Tickets would be given out during the military parade, but not everyone could get them. The audience had to go through strict political screening to get the tickets. Ordinary people could not get close to the scene at all, let alone go to Tiananmen Square to see it up close. This also made some of the people in Shangjing very unhappy. The military parade was at their doorstep. Although they could not see the soldiers marching, they could at least see the planes in the sky. So with this mentality, many people went out. With Tiananmen Square as the center, martial law was implemented within a 5-kilometer radius. Shangjing was quiet on this day. The streets were very deserted, and the empty streets were free for pedestrians to pass through. Although there was only one street that was controlled, there were almost no pedestrians or vehicles in the second ring road. It could be said that the streets were empty. What about the people? They were all along Chang'an Street, a few kilometers away from Tiananmen Square. Even if they could only see the parade vehicles passing by from a distance across the street, they would feel very satisfied. After all, watching it on TV and seeing it with their own eyes were two completely different experiences. 9:59 a.m. Everyone stood up. Salutes were fired. The national anthem was played. The national flag was raised. 70 salutes roared. It shocked the whole city. The little fellow was shocked and immediately looked up at the sky. The courtyard house was like a well. She sat in the well and looked up to see only a square of blue sky and white clouds. Then in every corner of Wuxia, on the land of 9.6 million square kilometers, the prelude of the March of the Volunteer Army sounded at the same time. Papa, it's time to sing. We have to stand up. It was probably because the kindergarten teacher had taught her that when the national anthem sounded, the little fellow jumped out of Chunxi's arms. She jumped and tried hard to pull Chunxi up. Seeing this, Chunxi could only pinch her little face and stand up from the rocking chair very cooperatively. The father and daughter faced the TV and stood side by side. The little fellow watched TV and imitated the movements on TV. She tried hard to raise her little hand in front of her forehead. Her hands were crooked and not straight, but her little face was very tense, and she had a serious look on her face. Get up, people who don't want to be slaves, she sang a sentence sweetly. After singing it, she found that Chunxi next to her had no reaction. So she immediately patted Chunxi's thigh, pursed her mouth and said unhappily, Papa, you have to sing too. The teacher said that we should sing the national anthem when we raise the flag. Seeing her expression, Chunxi knew that she was going to lose her temper. He quickly stood at attention, raised his right hand to his forehead, and then quickly said, Dad was wrong. Come on, let's sing together. After his delay, more than half of the national anthem had been sung, so Chunxi had to immediately sing, Get up, get up, get up. Hearing this, the little fellow immediately jumped up happily, clapped her hands and sang, We are of one heart, braving the enemy's gunfire, forward, forward, forward. After singing, she threw herself on Chunxi's lap, held Chunxi's leg and giggled. Chunxi sat back in the chair with her in his arms, and listened to the explanation on TV. For a moment, there was a rather emotional look on his face. The 70th anniversary of the victory of the War of Resistance was in Beijing. The 90th anniversary of the founding of the army was in MG. Chapter 97. When the marching music sounded, the long-awaited military parade finally began. When a group of soldiers slowly appeared in front of the camera, the little fellow finally saw what she liked to see. So she jumped out of Chunxi's arms again. She ran to the steps of the West Wing, raised her head and stuck out her chest, waved her arms and kicked her legs, trying to imitate the handsome appearance of soldiers. The little fellow's little face was tense, and she wanted to pretend to be serious. But her cute little appearance still made Chunxi laugh. There were only the father and daughter in the big yard, but it didn't seem empty at all because it was full of their laughter. The little fellow was playing happily, but at this time, Chunxi's phone rang. He took out his mobile phone and found that it was not a call, but a video call from Aunt Zhang. Seeing this, Chunxi immediately connected the video call, and then waved to the little fellow. Hey, you little brat, don't you know how to send a text message to me during the festival? Do you have to let me take the initiative to greet you? As soon as the video call was connected, Chunxi was about to greet Aunt Zhang, but what greeted him was Aunt Zhang's teasing. Seeing this, Chunxi immediately raised his hands and surrendered. He quickly pointed the camera at the little fellow and used her as a shield. Grandma, Grandma, I miss you so much. As soon as the little fellow saw that it was Aunt Zhang on the other side of the video, she immediately waved her little hand wildly at the camera. Looking at her excited and happy appearance, Aunt Zhang really fell into the trap. Therefore, she didn't have time to complain about Chunxi anymore. Instead, she smiled and said, Oh, my good granddaughter, Grandma misses you too. When are you going to let Dad bring you to Rong City to play again? Hearing this, the little fellow immediately turned to look at Chunxi and asked, Papa, when are we going to see Grandma? I miss Grandma. After hearing their conversation, Chunxi couldn't help laughing. How long had it been since they came back from Chengdu? Aunt Zhang was still blaming him for wasting money last time, but he didn't expect that she would take the initiative to let them go this time. It seemed that Aunt Zhang couldn't leave the little fellow. Thinking of this, Chunxi held the little fellow in his arms and said to her, Come, Nian Nian, let me say a few words to Grandma. The little fellow nodded obediently, and Chunxi pointed the camera at himself. After greeting Auntie Zhang, he said mysteriously, Auntie Zhang, take a look. Where is this? While talking, Chunxi slowly turned the camera. After slowly scanning the courtyard with the camera, he turned the camera back to himself. Hey, this is Sai Courtyard? Have you found Ying? Auntie Zhang had lived in this place for 10 years, so she was very familiar with it. Therefore, she immediately asked excitedly, Where's Ying? Let me see that girl. Chunxi shook his head helplessly and sighed. We haven't seen her yet. Maybe it was a bad time. When we came, there was no one at home, so I just brought Nian Nian here and planned to wait for her here. You haven't seen her? After hearing this, Aunt Zhang couldn't help but change her expression. In fact, she really hoped that Chunxi could find Ying. After all, she had been with Chunxi for a while, and she recognized Chunxi very much. She didn't tell Chunxi where Ying's house was because she wasn't familiar with Chunxi and wasn't sure what kind of person he was. On the other hand, she promised Ying that she wouldn't tell Chunxi. She didn't reveal any information, but Chunxi still found her, so she couldn't be blamed. Therefore, Aunt Zhang's first reaction was to be happy for them. However, she didn't expect Chunxi to still not see Ying. Where did that child go? Was she still angry with Mr. Qin? Aunt Zhang was lost in her thoughts as she thought about it. Chunxi waited for a while, but Aunt Zhang didn't say anything. After hesitating for a while, he asked carefully, Aunt Zhang, do you know Qin Yongyan? Aunt Zhang was stunned. She didn't seem to hear him clearly. Seeing this, Chunxi could only raise his voice and ask again. I mean, you know Qin Yongyan, right? Of course I know him. Mr. Qin is Ying's father. Hearing this, Chunxi was a little excited. Just as he was about to say something, Aunt Zhang couldn't help but let out a long sigh. She asked with a complicated expression, Ying hasn't told you about her family, right? No. Every time I asked, she was a little unhappy, so I didn't dare to ask too much. Sigh, so that's how it is. Hearing this, Aunt Zhang immediately let out a long sigh, then slowly sighed and said, Since you've already found her house, then I'll tell you. Okay. Hearing Auntie Zhang's words, Chunxi immediately sat up in excitement. Aunt Zhang was finally willing to tell him about Ying's family. How could he not be excited? When Auntie Zhang saw his reaction, she smiled in relief. After thinking for a while, she slowly spoke. I remember the first time I met Ying, she was only 8 years old. She's actually quite pitiful. Her mother passed away early, so Mr. Qin asked me to take care of her. As for me, I've been a nanny for 10 whole years, not counting this little one. Aunt Zhang smiled and pointed at the little one in Chunxi's arms. Then she continued. Ying is different from other children. She's been very sensible and independent since she was young. She doesn't cry, throw tantrums, or cling to people. I basically only need to cook for her every day. I don't have to worry about her life too much. Mr. Qin is also quite an easygoing person, so this nanny job is quite easy and enjoyable. Unfortunately, good times don't last long. When Ying was 13, Mr. Qin was transferred to work abroad, so he couldn't be with her every day. Think about it, a 13-year-old girl who lost her mother when she was young and her father wasn't by her side every day. How pitiful is that? At that time, I often asked her why she didn't live abroad with Mr. Qin. Speaking of which, that girl was also strange. She would rather be separated from her father than go abroad. She always said that it was better here, but she didn't want to leave. There were only 3 of us in this house. Mr. Qin didn't lack money and didn't rent out the more than 10 empty rooms. So when he was transferred, the house became much quieter. In the years after that, it was just the 2 of us living in the compound you're living in now. Mr. Qin would only come back during the holidays, and every time, he would come and go in a hurry. In a flash, 10 years have passed. I watched Ying go to primary school, middle school, and high school. I was even the one who attended the parent-teacher conference for her. When she graduated from high school, Mr. Qin was finally transferred back to China. At that time, my mission was completed, so I planned to go back to Chengdu. You don't know, but on the day I left, that girl insisted on sending me to the airport. She cried so hard. I've lived with her for so many years, but I've never seen her cry like that. Sigh. At this point, Aunt Zhang's eyes also turned red. She couldn't help but cry. She was still writing at 3 in the morning. Happy Christmas Eve. Chapter 98. Perhaps it was because she was reminded of the days she spent with Ying, but Aunt Zhang couldn't help but cry. From when Ying was 8 years old to when she was 18, Aunt Zhang took care of her for 10 whole years. How many decades did one have in life? 4 years in college, 2 years after graduation, and then Chen-Shi's disappearance and her pregnancy. In a flash, another 10 years had passed. How many decades did one have left in life? Chen-Shi had long noticed that something was wrong with Aunt Zhang's mood, so before Aunt Zhang cried, he coaxed the little girl to watch TV. The little girl couldn't bear to see others cry. If she saw her grandmother crying, she would probably cry immediately. Chen-Shi held the phone and didn't speak. After a long while, after Aunt Zhang's emotions gradually calmed down, Chen-Shi asked, Aunt Zhang, does Ying have any relatives? Yes, she seems to have quite a lot of relatives, but they're not in Shangjing. I have to go home during the holidays, so I haven't seen her relatives much. Does she have any siblings? There should be a few. I've seen Ying's younger sister, who is her second uncle's daughter. She only came once. But that girl isn't close to Ying. When she came, she was cold to Ying, as if someone owed her money. I don't like that girl. Younger sister? What's her name? I'm not familiar with that girl, and it's been more than 10 years. How can I remember? Okay. Chen-Shi nodded helplessly. He wanted to ask more about Ying, but at this time, Aunt Zhang's granddaughter suddenly cried. Chen-Shi had no choice but to reluctantly say goodbye to Aunt Zhang. Shangjing was in the north. Therefore, after the National Day, the weather would gradually turn cold, and the temperature difference between day and night would increase. The father and daughter naturally occupied this mansion, with a market value of hundreds of millions. Every afternoon after dinner, Chen-Shi would take the little girl to stroll around Shikahai. Gradually, many neighbors got to know them. It had been a long time since anyone had lived in this courtyard house. Therefore, in the beginning, some of the neighbors who still remembered Aunt Zhang and Ying would always look at Chen-Shi and his daughter suspiciously. As long as they did anything unusual, they would not hesitate to call the police. Let the outsiders see that other than the CY district in Shangjing, there was also the XC district. However, the little fellow didn't care about the strange gazes of others at all. Every time someone asked, more or less trying to test whether they were old deadbeats who had taken over someone else's house, she would proudly puff out her chest and say loudly, "This is my mommy's house. Therefore this is my home." At this time, people would ask, "Where's your mother?" This was a very complicated question. Therefore, every time she heard this question, she would always be like a frosted eggplant, weakly stammering, "My mama went abroad and hasn't returned yet." This was what Chen-Shi had told her. Her father wouldn't lie to her, so as long as they stayed here, her mother would definitely come back. She really wanted to see her mother, just like how Chen-Shi also wanted to see Ying. However, as time passed day by day, Chen-Shi's heart sank day by day. Every day, Feng Mintai would pretend to pay a visit to him. Although he said it was a visit, he was actually worried that Chen-Shi had already found the person he wanted, so he would renege on the debt and not pay. A clue was worth 1 million, but if Chen-Shi found the person he wanted to see in this house, then the 1 million would become 10 million. After all, he was the one who found the clue to this house. However, with his punctual visits every day, Feng Mintai gradually realized that the 10 million might not be so easy to earn. Helplessly, the project was restarted. This time, they focused on Qin Yongyan. This was the only clue that could be developed again. In the purple world, the wisps of smoke stopped cold, and the rain passed through the clouds. Envied the peach leaves, the curved sill in front of the window, the swallow's nest, and the willow's vermilion door. Looking back at the first year, the misty hair fluttered in the wind and the delicate spring. In the welcome place, only the youthful beauty was affectionate, and the jade pendant was attentive. Who knew that at this moment, the ecstasy, vaguely smiling in front of people, remembering the slender palm, it really became a dream. The resentment and memory of the flower should be a double literature, carrying the mood of wine, teaching the beauty poetry, regretting in vain that the romantic has wronged people, who should go, waiting to send the hatred, the two places equally. On October 10th, the first snow fell in the Mentugu mountain area. However, it could not be considered the first snow in Shangjing. The so-called first snow was strictly regulated. Only when more than 10 of the 20 man-made stations in Shangjing observed the phenomenon of snow, or when all 5 stations in the city, Chaoyang, Haidian, Fengtai, Shijingshan and Observatory, observed the phenomenon of snow, or when 3 or more of the 5 stations in the city observed the phenomenon of snow, and at least one station had snowfall. Only when the snow was 0.1 millimeter could it be considered the first snow. Winter was getting closer and closer, and the locust trees in the courtyard finally lost all their leaves. They held up the graceful branches of the withered trees, as if they were welcoming the coming winter. The little fellow went out less and less often. There was only one thing she liked now, and that was to hide in the warm room with the electric heater, wrapped in a quilt, and watch TV with the big cat. Shangjing was dry and cold, and Zhonghai was wet and cold. Although the temperature in Zhonghai was higher in winter, it was windy and humid. The most important thing was that there was no heating. The house in the Kongju district did not even have air conditioning, let alone heating, so the little fellow had always been afraid of winter. She did not expect that after coming to Shangjing, the electric heater in the courtyard house would make her fall in love with this winter. She stood in the courtyard in a daze for longer and longer. His temper was also getting worse and worse. Of course, for the little fellow, she still doted on her as usual. But for anyone other than the little fellow, she could only laugh. Including the big cat. Although she did not scare it much, the big cat now took the initiative to avoid Chen-Shi when it saw him. Unless the little fellow held it, it did not dare to get within 5 meters of Chen-Shi. Even Big Cat received this kind of treatment, not to mention the incomparably treacherous Feng Mintai. However, Feng Mintai was also a master of changing the rudder according to the wind. Since the last time he was kicked out of the courtyard by Chen-Shi, every time he came back, he would not cross the Chuehua gate again. This was because he had a vague feeling that something was about to happen. If he provoked Chen-Shi again, his life might be in danger. Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei did not dare to call Chen-Shi now. Although the influence of the energy cultivation pill had declined to the lowest point under their joint efforts. But some fires were easy to light. It was difficult to destroy them. So after a lot of hesitation and consideration, Ning Zhonghua had to summon up the courage to carefully call Chen-Shi. However, Chen-Shi only responded with one word. Get out. After hanging up the phone, Ning Zhonghua looked at Su Wei helplessly. Su Wei was a little confused. That was a boss above the ministerial level. Would Mr. Chen refuse? Ning Zhonghua shook his head and did not speak. Su Wei was so anxious that he scratched his ears and cheeks, wishing that he was the one who called just now. Ning Zhonghua patted him on the shoulder silently, motioned for him to calm down, and then walked to the window. After exhaling deeply, he could not help but sigh. A storm is coming. Wind building. It was getting colder and colder. November 21st. The little fellow received the biggest gift besides her father. New snow. When she woke up that night, Shangjing City had completely changed. The first snow of this year came earlier than before. When the little girl crawled out of New Anyuan's bed, she found that the courtyard had completely changed. It was like being painted with white paint, and the whole courtyard was dyed white. Wrapped in silver, it was exceptionally enchanting. She put on her small cotton-padded jacket, and did not wait for Chen-Shi to wash her face. She had already rushed out of the room and ran to the courtyard, shouting crazily. Chapter 99. When it snows, Shangjing becomes Beiping. When we go to Hohai to see the snow, we return to the Ming and Qing dynasties. This was what the poet Yin Lichuan wrote on her blog after she went to Hohai 1 year after the snow. The plain words were enough to move many people. That year, the snow in Shangjing was very thick. As far as the eye could see, the roads and roofs were flat, which also covered a lot of the modern atmosphere. Especially in Hohai, there were very few things that were obviously modern, and there were many old houses. The heavy snow covered all the hustle and bustle of modern society. Standing in the snow, it was enough to make people feel like they were in the Ming and Qing dynasties. Shangjing was covered with snow, and the palaces were all silver. This year's first snow had been falling for an exceptionally long time. Since last night, the snowflakes had not stopped falling. It was estimated that this year would also be a year of heavy snow. It rarely snowed in Zhonghai. Poor southern children, who had lived so long, had never even seen snow. The heavy snow completely ignited the little girl's childish nature. If it wasn't for the fact that the snow wasn't too thick, she would have been rolling around on the ground. The reason why the little girl was so excited was that she had never seen snow. Johns Hopkins University. The Johns Hopkins researchers at the Johns Hopkins University published a recent research report in the journal Science that when children are faced with novel and unexpected things, they will learn more than when they are faced with ordinary things, and it will make them smarter. If it was an ordinary parent, they might have already grabbed her back to wash up, eat, and do what they should do. But Qinshi didn't. He put the towel back in the basin, then went to the steps outside the west wing, quietly watching the little girl squatting on the ground and trying to rub a snowball. At the bottom of the steps, the snow had condensed into ice. The little girl scraped up the snow layer by layer, then put it in her hands and rubbed it into a ball. The snow was not too thick, so she rubbed it very slowly. And she didn't wear gloves. When she finally rubbed out an egg-sized snowball, her pink fingers were already red from the cold. "Papa! Snowball! Snowball!" The little girl ran to Qinshi with the snowball as if it were a treasure, as if she didn't notice that the snowball was so cold that her hands hurt. Qinshi squatted down and gently stroked her little face that was flushed with excitement. He said softly, "Be good, throw it away. We'll wash up and eat breakfast after you throw it out. Then Daddy will make a snowman with you, okay?" "Okay." The little guy nodded heavily. Then he turned around and raised his hand to the back of his head. Then, he threw it out with great force. Seeing the snowballs scattered all over the ground, the little fellow immediately clapped her hands happily. Qinshi gently held her hand and asked with concern, "Are you cold?" "Not cold." It was so cold that his bones hurt, but the little guy still laughed and shook his head. Qinshi didn't point it out. After wrapping her little hand in his true essence, he picked her up and said, "Let's go. Daddy will take you to wash your face, eat, and make a snowman." Make a snowman. Make a snowman. With the temptation of a snowman, the little girl immediately followed Qinshi to wash up. After breakfast, before Qinshi cleared the table, she couldn't wait to take Qinshi to the yard. There was not much snow on the ground, so Qinshi slowly raised his hands in the little girl's slightly excited cry. A gust of wind suddenly blew in the small yard. That year, the first snow in Shangjing was particularly heavy. At the entrance of Dongming Alley, a Spencer slowly came to a stop. From the outside, this car was somewhat similar to a Jinbei car, except that it had a Mercedes-Benz logo. There was only one woman sitting in the big car. She was holding a glass of red wine and shaking it slightly. After the car stopped, the woman lifted the curtain and looked inside. After confirming that she had arrived at the station, she lowered the partition between the car and the driver's seat, and then asked, "Old Meng, when did they live here?" "It should be September 29th. You told me not to get close to here, so I'm not very sure about the specific time." September 29th. The woman gently put the wine glass on the table in front of her, and then laughed softly. She seemed to be talking to herself and said softly, "Today is November 21st. Do they really think of this as their own home?" After that, she opened the door and got out of the car. The woman was very tall, and she was wearing a Canada coat, goose beige coat, and a pair of black Balenciaga boots. Looking at her dress, she looked like a model who came to the old street for a photo shoot. It was still snowing, and the stalls on the old street were not open today. After all, It was better to stay at home in this cold weather. The bluestone road of the old street was covered with snow, and the sound of the woman's footsteps echoed in the empty alley. A few minutes later, the woman came to the door of the courtyard. She didn't hesitate and directly pushed the door open. Chun-Shi and the little girl were squatting in the middle of the yard, making a snowman. He had already noticed the movement in the alley, so he stopped what he was doing. Therefore, when the woman pushed the door open and entered, Chun-Shi also stood up. One was in front of the screen wall in the southeast corner, and the other was in the middle of the yard in front of the main hall. The two of them glanced at each other. However, the tall courtyard wall blocked their view. Chun-Shi stood still. The little girl was busy adding bricks and tiles to the snowman, so she didn't notice Chun-Shi's strange behavior. The woman moved. Tap, tap, tap. Her heels stepped on the stone floor, making a crisp sound. Every time the sound rang, it was like a morning bell, beating Chun-Shi's chest fiercely. He stared blankly at the drooping flower gate that separated the inner and outer courtyards. The woman walked steadily, and soon crossed the front yard and came to the drooping flower gate. And at this moment, Chun-Shi also saw her face clearly. She wasn't Ying. An indescribable feeling immediately surged in Chun-Shi's heart. He stared blankly as the woman walked straight towards him. The little girl squatted on the ground, holding a ball of snow with both hands, and was about to slap it on the snowman. The woman was getting closer and closer, and her footsteps finally startled the little girl. The little girl turned her head and glanced at the woman who suddenly appeared. Then she suddenly grinned, as if she was very happy, and asked sweetly, "Sister, do you want to make a snowman with us?" The woman didn't speak. The little girl waited for a while. Seeing that she did not speak, he no longer paid attention to her, and continued to build his own snowman, huffing and puffing. The woman silently looked at the little girl squatting on the ground. After a long while, she suddenly asked, "What's her name?" Her voice sounded very cold. Just like today's weather, although the sun was bright, there were still snowflakes floating. Chun-Shi was stunned for a moment, then solemnly replied, "Chun-Yan." "What about you?" "Chun-Shi." "Chun-Shi?" After softly repeating this name, the woman finally shifted her gaze from the little girl to Chun-Shi. "My name is Qin Xueching. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Thank you, brother, Xiaozhongyu, for the 20,000 reward. I have to apologize to you here. It's not that I don't want to add more, it's because I really can't write that much. It's not that I'm not working hard, I've really done my best. I've been racking my brains every day to write. Please forgive me. Sincerely. This book's reader group. 5117933123. Chapter 100. My name is Qin Xueching. Her voice was as bright as the sun today, but her tone was as cold as the fluttering snowflakes. The snowflakes drifted into the necks of the passers-by. It was cold, and people couldn't help but shiver. They had no choice but to pull their clothes closer. Qin Xueching. His surname was also Qin. Upon closer inspection, her appearance actually bore some resemblance to Ying. However, the cold aura she exuded was worlds apart from Ying's. If they had met on the road, perhaps even Chun-Shi wouldn't have been able to recognize her. This woman with a cold expression in front of him was actually Ying's sister. Auntie Zhang had said that Ying had a younger sister who was her second uncle's daughter. If he was not mistaken, it was the woman in front of him. After hearing the woman's self-introduction, Chun-Shi, who had been a little hesitant, immediately stepped forward and said very politely, "Hello, hello." As he spoke, Chun-Shi extended his right hand to her. To be honest, this was the first time he had encountered such a situation in his hundreds of years of life. She was his sister-in-law, after all. There was an old saying in Shangjing, "The sister-in-law is half of the brother-in-law's ass." It meant that it would be a waste not to feel pain, and it would be a waste not to touch it. In fact, it was all caused by the traditional feudal thinking of the past. It was easier to get familiar with people. Even if they were discovered, his mother-in-law would turn a blind eye to it. After all, they used to be very particular about not airing their dirty linen in public. Chun-Shi didn't have such disgusting thoughts. He was just a little nervous because it was his first time meeting Ying's relatives. Yes, nervous. He was afraid that he would leave a bad first impression on this woman named Qin Xueqing. This had nothing to do with status, strength, or cultivation. Instead, it was directly related to Yingying's position in his heart. As the saying goes, love a house, love its crow. Chen Shi loved Yingying very much, so naturally, he would show enough kindness to her family. However, what Chen Shi didn't expect was, this was the first time the two of them had met. However, Qin Xueqing seemed to hold a certain degree of hostility towards him. Do you see the words outside? This is the Qin clan. You can leave. Her tone was very calm, as if she was just narrating a very simple matter. Hearing this, Chen Shi looked at her with some surprise. After being stunned for a moment, Chen Shi gently shook his head and withdrew his right hand that was expressing goodwill. I'm waiting for Yingying. Once I see her, I'll leave. She won't come. Qin Xueqing glanced at Chen Shi and then looked at the little fellow again. However, when she saw the little fellow's silly look, she didn't like him. Instead, a trace of imperceptible disgust flashed through her eyes. If I were you, I would take the child and go as far away as possible now. Why? Chen Shi seemed to be a little puzzled. Qin Xueqing didn't answer immediately. She just looked at the little fellow silently, as if she was seriously thinking about something. After a long period of silence, she looked at Chen Shi again and said calmly, because you don't deserve it. I don't deserve it. As if he had heard a big joke, Chen Shi suddenly couldn't help laughing. He shook his head and chuckled involuntarily. You mean that your family is very particular about matching in social status, right? Qin Xueqing was silent. Chen Shi pointed to the main hall behind him and asked with a smile. It's the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic. Why, the Great Revolution didn't sweep away your stubborn feudal ideas. Hearing this, Qin Xueqing's expression, which had never changed since ancient times, finally relaxed a little. She sighed softly. With some doubts, she said softly as if she was talking to herself. I really don't understand what my sister is thinking. She actually gave birth to a daughter for you. The smile on Chen Shi's face disappeared. This was because Zhao Yuan had once said something similar. If only Qin Xueqing wasn't his sister-in-law. Chen Shi really didn't expect that his first meeting with his sister-in-law would end up like this. The atmosphere in the yard suddenly dropped to the freezing point. However, Qin Xueqing obviously didn't care about Chen Shi's feelings. After thinking for a while, she sighed softly with a kind of almost pity in her eyes. Well, I'll tell you why. After that, Qin Xueqing raised her delicate hand. Her fingers were very beautiful, white and slender and without impurities, as perfect as cold jade. Then she shook her 5 fingers gently. An invisible force shot out in an instant and hit the snowman in front of the little fellow. Bang! The snowman collapsed in an instant, turning into countless pieces of snow that drifted in all directions. She flicked her 5 fingers and hit the snowman 10 feet away. The sudden turn of events stunned the little fellow. She was holding a ball of ice and was about to hit the snowman's head with the ice in her hand. But in the blink of an eye, the snowman disappeared. The snowman that she had worked hard to build for a long time had turned into countless pieces and completely disappeared in front of her eyes. The little fellow looked down at the original position of the snowman. There was only a thick layer of snow left there. Papa. The little fellow squatted on the ground and held the ice. She looked up at Chen Shi in confusion. Her eyes were full of doubts. Where did the snowman go? She looked down at the original position of the snowman again, until she was sure that the snowman was really gone. Then with a wah sound he suddenly burst into tears. In fact, Chen Shi could have stopped Qin Xueqing's behavior. But he didn't. Because of this woman's actions, he suddenly had a kind of enlightenment. However, it was precisely because of his carelessness that the little fellow began to wail in grief. So, Chen Shi quickly squatted down and gently held the little fellow in his arms. The little fellow cried sadly. As soon as Chen Shi stretched out his hand, she rushed directly into Chen Shi's arms, and then tightly hugged his neck. She pursed her lips and cried loudly, Papa, the snowman is gone. The snowman is gone. Good girl, Nian Nian, don't cry. Papa will show you a magic trick, okay? However, the only response he got was the little fellow's loud cries full of energy. Chunshi stopped talking and slowly stood up with her in his arms. The little fellow cried on Chunshi's shoulder. Her pitiful appearance was really pitiful. Chunshi gently patted her head and comforted her with a few words. Then he turned his head and calmly said to Qin Xueqing, "You scared my daughter." This time, it was Qin Xueqing's turn to be stunned. "You know what? If you weren't Yingying's sister, you would have died 10,000 times by now. I want to reason with you, but you have to talk to me about strength. Then I'll show you what strength is." As soon as he finished speaking, the wind and snow all over the sky suddenly became stronger. Then a tornado strangely blew in the yard. All the snowflakes above the yard were rolled into the wind column. The originally invisible wind column seemed to have become a large white funnel at this moment. And the center of the funnel was where the snowman was just now. Chunshi stood beside the snowman, holding the little fellow in his left hand and slowly stretched out his right hand. Countless snowflakes continued to fall on the snow pile under the guidance of the wind. Then, the snowman slowly condensed into a shape at a speed visible to the naked eye, and then became bigger and bigger. What was happening in front of her eyes was completely beyond Qin Xueqing's imagination. She stared at the man holding the child in a daze and stepped back a few steps in fear. The snowman was growing taller and taller. In just a few breaths, it had become a super large snowman more than 3 meters tall. This also made Qin Xueqing's beautiful eyes almost pop out. What was happening in front of her eyes could not be done by human strength. Thinking of this, she could not help but ask with a trembling voice, Who are you?" "Me." Hearing this, Chunshi chuckled softly. Chapter 101. In the Sihiyuan. The sudden gust of wind finally subsided. The heavy snowfall was actually not a good sign. As the saying goes, timely snow indicates a bumper year. Only a moderate amount of snow could be called timely snow. A moderate amount of snow could not only kill insects and keep warm, but also provide water for crops, and would not crush the crops. This was the sign of a bumper year. The snow stopped. The little fellow stared blankly at the huge snowman in front of her. The scene that unfolded before her eyes had completely stunned her. She opened her mouth involuntarily. Even if she did not cry again, her little nose was twitching unconsciously. She didn't even need Chunshi to coax her. She had already completely forgotten about crying. "Papa, this snowman is so big." The little girl raised her little head slightly. Her shocked expression immediately made Chunshi unable to help but smile. Seeing her adorable appearance, Chunshi's mood couldn't help but improve a lot. "Mua." After kissing the little fellow's face heavily, Chunshi looked at her and asked softly, "What do you think? Do you like this snowman?" "Yes." Chunshi's question made the little fellow come to her senses. Therefore, she immediately sat in his arms and began to dance. "Papa, put me down. I want to play with the snowman." Chunshi quickly put her down. As soon as she stepped on the ground, the little fellow threw herself into the snowman's arms. The snowman wouldn't carry her, so she plunged her small body into the snow. The falling snow kept falling on the little fellow's head, and some even fell into her clothes. Although she was shivering because of the cold, she enjoyed it and giggled against the snowman. Looking at how excited she was probably about to bury her head in a pile of snow. Chunshi put down the little fellow, and then turned to look at Qin Xueqing. At this time, Qin Xueqing had also come to her senses. She originally thought that Chunshi was just an ordinary person, but she didn't expect that Chunshi was actually a necromancer. Furthermore, with the means that Chunshi had just displayed, his realm might have even reached the level of cultivation above the Daoentry realm. Han Fizi, a human leader. Moreover, the cultivators of magic are incompatible with the ministers of the path. How do you explain this? If the master has a warlock, then the high minister will not be able to make a decision, and the high minister will not dare to sell the high minister. If the high minister controls the power and influence, then the way of the master will be clear. Records of the Grand Historian, Huainan's Hengshan biographies. In the past, Qin Ju followed the path of the saint and killed the sorcerers. He burned the book and book, abandoning etiquette and righteousness and relying on deceit. He accepted the punishment and turned the millet of the sea into the West River. Han Wangfu's treatise on the hidden husband. Virtuous men's difficulty. Those who are weak in virtue will have a bad impression of good deeds. Those who are in political turmoil will have a bad impression of governance. This is the reason why the Qin dynasty killed Yu and trapped the warlocks. Necromancers were necromancers, also known as warlocks. They were adept at worshipping ghosts and gods, concocting pills to achieve longevity, and were even known as spellcasters. For example, the hermit expert who allowed Ning Zhonghua to live for more than 50 years was most likely a necromancer. The necromancer lineage had a long history, but now it had almost disappeared from the world. Even the legends about necromancers were pitifully few. Most of the remaining branches of the necromancer lineage lived in seclusion deep in the mountains, maintaining the ancient tradition of passing down one lineage to a single person. The culprit behind the decline of the necromancer lineage was actually the first emperor in the history of Wuxia, Qin Shi Huang. Qin Shi Huang burned books and buried Confucians. This was a very cruel history. There were many historical records about this, and the historians of the past dynasties also had many discussions about it. However, the strange thing was that all kinds of books had detailed records of the burning of books, but the records of the burying of Confucians were very vague. In fact, this was because Qin Shi Huang did not kill Confucian scholars at all, but necromancers. The reason why Qin Shi Huang wanted to kill necromancers and swear to cut off the inheritance of necromancers was very simple. Back then, necromancer Su Fu was ordered by Qin Shi Huang to lead 3,000 boys and girls to the East Sea to search for the legendary Penglai, Fangzong, and Yingzhou Immortal Mountains to find the elixir of immortality. However, after Su Fu left, there was no news of him, and he never returned to Wuxia. Qin Shi Huang, who realized that he had been deceived, was furious and vented his anger on the necromancer lineage. He hatefully killed countless necromancers, causing the necromancer lineage to almost be cut off. After the Eastern Han dynasty, it was already a long time ago from the Qin dynasty. The public opinion of the Qin dynasty, as well as the status of the Confucian school at that time, and the popularity of the modern literature school, distorted the facts and completely twisted the story of Qin Shi Huang deceiving necromancers into Qin Shi Huang deceiving Confucians. To put it bluntly, Qin Shi Huang was framed, which was why he was cursed by the Confucian school for more than 1,000 years. As for whether this was revenge on Qin Shi Huang by the remnants of the necromancers, no one knew. After all, history had long turned to dust. With a flip of his hand, he could create clouds and rain with a flip of his hand. This kind of heaven-defying means that could create clouds and rain with a flip of his hand was clearly not an existence that Qin Wanqing could deal with. She couldn't help but feel afraid and wanted to leave this strange place as soon as possible. However, since she was already here, how could Qin Shi let her go? This was his sister-in-law who had a lot to do with Yingying. He had to keep her. Therefore, as soon as Qin Xueqing turned around, Qin Shi shouted at the big cat, "Big cat, keep the guest." Meow. The big cat had been living in fear all day recently. Now that it finally had a chance to show off, it naturally worked hard. Thus, just as Qin Wanqing took a step forward, a voice rang out. The big cat, who had been squatting on the steps of the west wing, had turned into a black shadow and rushed to the drooping flower door in an instant. As its body grew rapidly, Qin Xueqing couldn't help but widen her eyes. Monster! The big cat showed its true form. Its front legs were slightly bent, and its back legs were on the ground. Its body was slightly arched, and its eyes were fixed on Qin Xueqing. It even grinned, revealing a mouthful of sharp teeth. Seeing this, Qin Wanqing had no choice but to stop in her tracks. She hesitated for a moment, then turned around and shouted at Qin Shi. "Who are you?" Hearing this, Qin Shi could only shake his head and say helplessly, "I seem to remember telling you. My name is Qin Shi. I am Qin Ruoying's husband, Qin Yan's father." "You." Qin Xueqing stomped her foot angrily. She didn't know what to do now. Not to mention this unfathomable man. Even the strange monster behind her was something she couldn't guarantee that she could walk past it unscathed. Just as Qin Xueqing was feeling vexed, the little girl suddenly saw the big cat squatting in front of the drooping flower door. She had seen too many amazing things today. But at this moment, when she saw the big cat's enlarged appearance, she couldn't help but raise her small hand and rub her eyes. Big cat. Is that you? The little girl and the big cat had been together for so long that they even used the same blanket. Therefore, almost without much thought, the little girl realized that this huge black panther was very similar to her big cat. In order to confirm its guess, the little brat ran toward the drooping flower gate. Meow, boss was here, so the big cat could only meow obediently as a greeting. After hearing that familiar voice, the little girl was excited. She didn't dare to approach at first, but when she heard the big cat's meow, she immediately opened her arms and pounced on it, then hugged the big cat's head. Big cat! Big cat! Big cat! It's really you! The little girl was too excited, so she used her small hands to rub the big cat's head. The big cat's face was rubbed out of shape, but it didn't dare to hide. So it could only retract the barbs on its tongue, and stick out its tongue to lick the little girl, until she didn't have time to rub it again. The little girl hugged the big cat and giggled happily. But then an idea suddenly appeared in her mind, so she immediately shouted happily, "Big cat! Can I ride you?" It wasn't a question, but a statement. So without waiting for the big cat to say anything, she was already hugging the big cat's neck and jumping with all her strength, trying to climb up its back. Unfortunately, she was too short. After the big cat grew up, it was at least 2/3 of her height, so the little girl couldn't climb up at all. Seeing this, the big cat could only obediently lower its body and let her ride on it. After the little girl sat down, the big cat stood up again, and the little girl hugged the big cat's neck with both hands, lying on top of it and giggling. Big cat! Big cat! Go go go! In the courtyard, the big cat carried the little girl on its back, and under her constant urging, it had no choice but to run in circles around the courtyard. It didn't dare to run too fast, afraid that the little girl would fall. If the little girl accidentally fell, it estimated that all 4 of its legs would be broken by Qin Shi. So it was better to be careful. Qin Xueqing stood in the same place, and her mind was blank. She stared blankly at everything that was happening in front of her. While in a trance, she felt dizzy. Thank you to the boss. Reading books is like life. For the 20,000 reward. Thank you to the boss. A mess for the 10,000 reward. Thank you to the boss, Assad, for the 30,000 reward. This book's reader group. 511793123 group name. Destroy Earth Strategic Headquarters. Chapter 102. In the Qin family's courtyard. It should have been a place Qin Xueqing was very familiar with. But now this place felt very strange to her. It was all because of those 2 uninvited guests. No, it was 3. Because this black cat, which seemed to be a pet, was at least a monster that had cultivated for hundreds of years. Nian rode the big cat, and jumped around the courtyard. In order to prevent her from falling, Qin Shi specially put a rope around the big cat's neck, and made a simple rein for her. The little fellow was amazing now. In addition to hide and seek in 123 wooden men, she finally had one more entertainment. Riding the big cat. Riding the big cat was much more fun than riding Papa, so she didn't want to get down after riding it. She stuck to the big cat. It had no choice but to take her slowly round and round. Qin Xueqing stood on the steps of the east wing, looking at the child in front of her who was riding the Black Panther in circles, but she was very upset. This child was her sister's daughter, so what was her relationship with her? She frowned and thought for a while before she finally figured it out. She should be the child's aunt, and the child should be her niece. Aunt? Niece. Qin Xueqing stood on the steps, slightly lost in thought. At this time, the little fellow rode the big cat in front of her. Sister, do you want to play with me? I'll invite you to ride the big cat. Nian didn't know that her snowman was destroyed by the woman in front of her, so she was very friendly to this strange woman who suddenly appeared in their house. However, after hearing her words, Qin Xueqing glared at the little fellow with slight disgust. The little fellow was so happy that she didn't realize that this woman didn't like her very much. However, the big cat under her felt it. So the big cat immediately grinned and growled. Meow. With a low growl of indignation, the big cat took the little guy and walked past her from behind. Looking at the big cat's attitude, it was also as arrogant as a pushover. It was not willing to let the little guy talk to this woman at all. The reason why Qin Xueqing was still standing here was because of Qin Xueqing. It wasn't that she didn't want to leave, but she couldn't. Every time she tried to leave, Chen would always use a method she couldn't understand to grab her back. It was as if there was an invisible hand stopping her. Even if she wanted to climb over the wall to escape, that hand would grab her and put her back into the courtyard. It was like being trapped in a toy castle, and she was just one of the toy soldiers. This kind of celestial means also completely cut off Qin Xueqing's idea of escape. Dao initiation, Dharma cultivation, ascension. The lineage of necromancers was too mysterious. Although Qin Xueqing had heard about it a long time ago, she didn't expect that a real necromancer with cultivation would be so terrible. Therefore, she was also very honored to become Chen Qi's captive. Although she was a captive, she was actually treated well. Except for not being able to leave the courtyard, Chen Qi didn't do anything to her. Or it could be said that Chen Qi didn't dare to do anything to her. Did he want to tie her up and hang her upside down with a whip dripping wax? She was his sister-in-law, not an outsider. They were all family. Obviously, Chen Qi couldn't offend her too much. Chen Qi only had one purpose, and that was to make her tell him where Yingying was. Perhaps seeing that Chen Qi didn't dare to do anything to her, Qin Xueqing simply closed her mouth and refused to say a word. Chen Qi couldn't do anything to her, so he could only let her be. His sister-in-law had just arrived. As her brother-in-law, he still had to be a little polite to her. However, Chen Qi's patience was always limited. Therefore, he could only hope that Qin Xueqing wouldn't refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Otherwise, it would be embarrassing for everyone. Obviously, it wouldn't be a good thing. Because the little fellow didn't like to eat outside food, Chen Qi had already started to cook as early as the second day after she moved in. Today, there were distinguished guests, so Chen Qi made a particularly sumptuous meal. 4 dishes and a soup, all of which were main dishes. One of the dishes was braised shark's fin in yellow sauce. This dish was characterized by its bright apricot yellow color, soft and tender meat, extremely mellow and fresh taste, and the whole wing was juicy. Because it was too cold, Chen Qi could only put the dishes on the table in the west wing. After he brought the dishes one by one, the little fellow didn't even need to be called. She rushed over on the big cat as soon as she smelled the aroma. "Papa, it smells so good. I'm hungry." "If you're hungry, wash your hands. You can eat after washing your hands." "Okay, big cat, let's wash our hands." With the temptation of delicious food, the little mischievous girl finally didn't need Chen Qi to wait on her. She ran to wash her hands by herself. At this time, Chen Qi walked out of the room and looked at Qin Xueqing opposite him. He asked very politely, "Do you want to eat together?" As he spoke, Chen Qi turned sideways and pointed to the table behind him. However, after hearing his words, Qin Xueqing was like a cat whose tail was stepped on. She immediately shouted angrily, "Bah!" After fiercely glaring at Chen Qi, she opened the door of the east wing, walked in and slammed the door. The weather was so cold, but she still stood in the yard for so long in the cold wind. Thinking about it, it was quite silly. Chen Qi smiled softly and returned to the west wing, very satisfied. The whole yard was set up by him. As long as Qin Xueqing didn't tell him the whereabouts of Yingying, she would have to obediently stay here for one more day. When he forced Qin Xueqing to stay just now, Chen Qi had already used his true qi to search her body. However, Qin Xueqing didn't bring her mobile phone, so Chen Qi couldn't check her phone number. 3 days, Chen Qi only gave her 3 days to consider. If she still refused to tell him after 3 days, then don't blame him for not giving her face as her brother-in-law. Just as Chen Qi was thinking about how to deal with Qin Xueqing, the little girl ran back after washing her hands. She climbed onto the chair with all her strength, picked up the spoon and was ready to eat. However, at this time, the little girl seemed to have thought of something. She quickly turned her head and looked out of the window. Then she asked with some doubts, "Papa, where's that sister just now? Isn't she going to eat with us?" Hearing this, Chen Qi rubbed her head and pulled the plate of braised shark's fin to her. Then he said with a smile, "She's your mother's sister." "Mama's sister? Who's that? You should call her Aunt." "Aunt? Aunt doesn't eat with us? She's good at martial arts, so she doesn't need to eat." Oh, Aunt is so pitiful. The food is so delicious, but she doesn't need to eat. Good girl, eat more if it's delicious. Okay. However, at this moment, in the East Wing, Qin Xueqing frowned slightly, and couldn't help but put her hand on her stomach. Martial artists were not immortal cultivators. Their physical energy consumption was especially large, so their usual appetite was also especially large. She hadn't eaten for a few hours, but her stomach began to growl. Qin Xueqing couldn't help but look through the window at the West Wing opposite. She finally understood why Chen Shi pretended to ask her to eat with him. He guessed that she wouldn't go, so he used this method to disgust her. She couldn't beat him in a fight, and she couldn't leave. Now she couldn't even eat. Thinking of this, Qin Xueqing couldn't help but turn pale. She couldn't live like this. So after hesitating for a while, Qin Xueqing kicked open the door and strode toward the West Wing opposite. I doubt it. Did you forget the name of my book? This is Becoming a Stay-at-Home Dad After Returning from Cultivation, not Becoming a Stay-at-Home King After Returning from Cultivation. I can't abandon my daily life for the sake of showing off, because that's a very stupid way of doing things. I have two kinds of readers. One likes to read cool stories, and the other likes to read warm daily lives. But recently, the readers who like to read cool stories have been making more and more trouble. It's even developed to the point where even Yin Yin said that I'm lame. I really want the two kinds of readers to coexist, so there will be a big climax, but it will be a gradual process. Because in my heart, 100 face-slapping episodes are not as important as a complete climax. Right, bro? In addition, some people say that I'm half an article on Baidu. If I want to Baidu, I have to at least have this knowledge and know that this thing exists in advance, okay? I'm not here to teach popular science. But if I don't write, will other readers know about this? Chapter 103. Bang! With a stomach full of resentment, Qin Xueqing kicked the door of the West Wing hard. However, what she got in response to her kick was an even stronger reaction force. It was obviously a wooden door, but it was as hard as the door of a bank vault. It was obvious that Chen Shi was making trouble. Qin Xueqing gritted her teeth and helplessly withdrew her right foot. Because she was so angry, her full chest rose and fell rapidly with her rapid breathing. This was great. She couldn't even open the door. But if she went back in resentment, she felt very unwilling. But if she knocked on the door properly, she couldn't bring herself to do it. The snow had stopped. But the cold wind was still whistling. Qin Xueqing stood at the door of the West Wing with resentment. She didn't know what to do now. She finally understood what despair was. It was the first time she had experienced such a feeling in her life. She couldn't beat him, and she couldn't run away. With her status, it was impossible for her to curse in the streets like a shrew. What else could she do? Chen Shi was like an experienced hunter, and she was like an injured prey, being wantonly played by Chen Shi in the palm of her hand. The more Qin Xueqing thought about it, the angrier she became. So she immediately turned and walked back to the East Wing. Her stubbornness also came up. She was a martial arts grandmaster in the clasping Dan realm. Even if she didn't eat or drink for a month, she wouldn't die. At worst, she would go back and slowly waste time with him. Qin Xueqing made up her mind. But when she turned and was about to leave, the door behind her suddenly opened. The little fellow turned and saw Qin Xueqing outside the room, so she immediately took the spoon and waved it happily. As she waved, she shouted happily, "Auntie, Aunt, do you want to eat with us?" The little fellow enthusiastically invited Qin Xueqing. However, Qin Xueqing was not in the mood to eat at this moment, so she did not even turn her head and walked directly to the East Wing. However, the moment she took a step forward, she was horrified to find that she could not control her body. An invisible force suddenly seized control of her body and manipulated her to slowly turn her body. At this moment, she was like a remote-controlled robot. Under the control of someone else, she walked stiffly towards the West Wing. Seeing that, Qin Xueqing shouted in fear, "What did you do to me? Let me go." Chen Shi didn't pay attention to her, but smiled and controlled her to sit next to the little guy. After that, Chen Shi stroked the little girl's head and asked softly, "Nian Nian, can you go and get a bowl of rice for your aunt?" "All right." Hearing that, The little fellow immediately nodded happily, then jumped off the chair and ran to the rice cooker to fill Qin Xueqing's bowl with rice. Although she did not understand what the word aunt meant, as long as it had something to do with Mama, the little fellow would show full enthusiasm. While the little fellow went to get more rice, Chunxi turned to look at Qin Xueqing and asked with a smile, "What do you think? Isn't my daughter cute?" Qin Xueqing struggled to get rid of Chunxi's restraint, but it was obviously in vain. Therefore she had to scold him harshly. "Let me go." "I can let you go, but you have to eat this meal first." Chunxi smiled and pointed to the dishes on the table. Qin Xueqing did not answer, but glared at him fiercely. "Aunt, the rice." The little fellow quickly ran back with the bowl, and then happily raised the bowl in front of Qin Xueqing. Seeing that, Qin Xueqing was still a little hesitant. Chunxi did not talk nonsense with her and immediately controlled her to take the bowl from the little fellow's hand. Qin Xueqing flew into a rage and wanted to scold Chunxi. But at this time, she found that she could move again. After being stunned for a moment, Qin Xueqing's first reaction was to leave here. But just as she moved, Chunxi restrained her again. "You." Qin Wanqing wanted to say something, but as soon as she said a word, it was as if someone was strangling her neck. She swallowed the words that she was about to say. Chunxi glanced at her lightly and said calmly, "Eat." At this time, the little fellow also ran back to her seat, took the spoon and was ready to start again. After drinking a mouthful of fresh soup with great satisfaction, the little fellow found that Qin Xueqing still held the bowl just now, so she asked with some doubts, "Aunt, why don't you eat?" Seeing the little fellow's puzzled face, Qin Xueqing collapsed. After being tormented by Chunxi, she was so angry that she was about to cry. She would rather be beaten to death by Chunxi than be humiliated by Chunxi so wantonly. Yes, humiliated. Like a doll, Chunxi held her in his hand and played with her casually. She tried for a while and found that she could speak. She immediately said quickly, "Let me go, I'll eat." As soon as she finished speaking, she found that she could move. So Qin Xueqing held the bowl in one hand and the chopsticks in the other, stiffly digging into the bowl of steaming white rice. She didn't take any food and just ate the rice. Seeing that she didn't take any food, Chunxi said with a smile, "You're a guest. Don't just eat. Try the food I made." Hearing this, Qin Xueqing's movements paused. Then, a line of tears suddenly fell from her face. She was angry and cried because of Chunxi. Chunxi didn't expect that he could make his sister-in-law cry, so he quickly asked the little fellow, "Nian, are you full?" "I'm full. I'm so full." "Then go watch cartoons with Big Cat." Okay. When it came to cartoons, the little fellow was full of energy. So when Chunxi put her on the ground, she shouted for Big Cat to watch cartoons on the bed. After the little fellow left, Chunxi turned to look at Qin Xueqing. At this time, Qin Xueqing had secretly wiped away the tears on her face. "Let's talk." Qin Xueqing didn't say anything, but lowered her head and continued to dig into the white rice in her hand. She didn't have the arrogance she had when she first arrived. Instead, she looked more like a little woman who had been wronged. This was also the result that Chunxi wanted. Seeing that she had finally removed the layers of shell, Chunxi asked again, "I'm really curious. Why did you have a flash of murderous intent when you first saw Nian?" Qin Xueqing was stunned. She didn't expect that Chunxi could even feel this. You should be glad that the murderous intent in your heart disappeared in a flash. Otherwise, I think we might not even have the chance to sit here and talk. The so-called murderous intent and murderous intent. One represented the desire to kill, the other represented the preparation to kill. The two didn't seem to be very different, but there was an essential difference. The murderous intent was an idea that came out in an instant, while the murderous intent was the breath before the preparation to kill. Qin Xueqing was a master of martial arts, so every time she was ready to make a move, the muscles all over her body would naturally tighten, and the pores would immediately contract and close. If it was a master of the same level, he would naturally be able to detect all kinds of subtle changes in her body. This was the so-called murderous intent, which also meant that she was about to make a move. The murderous intent could be perceived, but the murderous intent couldn't be perceived. because the murderous intent was just a kind of thought. Unless one could see through people's hearts, how could one perceive the thoughts of others? Shi couldn't see through people's hearts. But he could infer from Qin Xueqing's subtle expression at that moment. Qin Xueqing should really be glad. The murderous intent in her heart came and went quickly. Otherwise, she would really be crushed to death by Shi on the spot. Qin Xueqing didn't answer. Shi smiled and continued. You are very strange. I guess you haven't even killed a chicken, but today you want to kill a child. And it's your sister's child. Tell me why. After that, Shi looked at her quietly. Qin Xueqing held the bowl and lowered her head as if she was thinking. She was silent for a long time. Shi also waited for her for a long time. Chapter 104. Because if she doesn't die, my sister will die. As soon as he finished speaking, Qin Xueqing clearly felt a strong murderous aura erupting from Shi's body. The murderous aura was so strong that she was so scared that her muscles tensed up, and she subconsciously wanted to take a defensive stance. And it wasn't just her. Even the big cat who was watching cartoons was shocked. But the big cat was very smart and immediately burrowed into the little guy's arms. The little guy naturally hugged the big cat. This behavior was like a solid reassuring pill for the big cat. So after the big cat calmed down, it turned its head and poked its head out to observe the situation at the dining table. Why? Shi's voice was very calm, and there was nothing strange about the expression on his face. But his body was constantly emitting a monstrous murderous aura. He was a cultivator, not a warrior. So when he was angry, the surrounding spirit energy would also surge. Therefore, Qin Xueqing was a master after all. So even if she didn't see any signs of Shi wanting to attack, she could clearly sense that Shi wanted to kill someone. This brother-in-law of hers, who had been hiding his strength, finally showed his fangs. Qin Xueqing was a little lost in thought, as if she didn't hear Shi's words. So Shi asked again, why? Ah. Qin Xueqing's body suddenly trembled, and then she looked at Shi with a complicated expression. She reluctantly shook her head and said, I can't tell you. I shouldn't have come to you at all. I was meddlesome. Hearing this, Shi suddenly laughed. You brought that necklace over for her, didn't you? After saying this, Shi looked thoughtfully at the little guy who was sitting on the bed and watching cartoons attentively. Qin Xueqing didn't reply. You want to drive us away, because you're afraid that your family will find out that Yingying gave birth to a daughter for me, right? Qin Xueqing still didn't speak. Shi waited for a long time. Seeing that she didn't want to speak again, Shi changed the topic and asked with interest, if I remember correctly, those who are above transforming strength are called masters, so you should be a martial arts master, right? Hearing this, Qin Wanqing finally nodded and replied somewhat reluctantly, above the neutral strength stage is the controlled Dan stage. Only after achieving the controlled Dan stage can one become a grandmaster. I've seen people at the peak strength stage, but they are older than you and have been through hundreds of battles. They always have a kind of hostility that can't be hidden. You don't have it, and your realm is far higher than theirs. So you do have some reason to be proud. However, when she heard Shi's assessed, Qin Xueqing immediately frowned and scolded in exasperation. Are you trying to humiliate me? Don't think that you're so great. If we're at the same level, I can kill you as easily as killing a chicken within 10 steps. Really? Shi pretended to look at her in surprise. Then he asked with a smile. In fact, I'm very curious. Have you ever killed a chicken? Qin Xueqing was irritated by him again. She got up and wanted to leave, but how could Shi let her go? So the moment she got up, Shi stopped her again and said with a smile, don't be angry, don't be angry. Today is the first time we've met, and I want to talk to you more. What do you want? Nothing. As long as you tell me where Yingying is, I'll let you go right away. Qin Xueqing was stunned. After being stunned for a while, she seemed to think of something and said with a look of contempt, even if I tell you, what can you do? Since you're a necromancer, let me ask you, do you know the Gate of Heaven? Gate of Heaven? What's that? Shi was a little confused. It was the first time he had heard of this term. Qin Shueqing saw his confused look and couldn't help laughing. You don't even know the gate of heaven. It was as if she had found something very funny. Qin Shueqing laughed louder and louder. In the end, even the little fellow was alarmed by her laughter. The little fellow turned her head and glanced at this strange aunt. Then she continued to watch cartoons with the big cat in her arms. She didn't speak, but looked at her quietly. He was as calm as a pool of stagnant water, without any ripples. Qin Shueqing laughed for a while, but when she saw Chen-Shi's indifferent look, her face fell again. Bah! Summer insects can't talk about ice, and frogs in the well can't talk about the sea. You're really like an arrogant toad. Oh, is that so? Chen-Shi also laughed with her and asked, the gate of heaven you're talking about, is it the southern gate of the heavenly court? As long as you walk through the southern gate, you can be ranked as an immortal? Hearing this, Qin Shueqing laughed and said, if you want to understand it that way, it's actually not wrong. And then? Chen-Shi spread his hands and asked with a puzzled look, what does that have to do with me? Qin Shueqing was choked by his words. She felt like she was playing the lute to a cow. Therefore, she couldn't help but say angrily, my sister and I are Xiannu who presides over the gate of heaven. If the gate of heaven doesn't open, we can't get married. If people find out that she has a child, my sister will be burned alive. Oh, I see. Chen-Shi nodded, then suddenly stood up and began to clean up the tableware on the table. After realizing that she had said something wrong, Qin Shueqing stared at him blankly. After a while, she asked hesitantly, what else do you want? My sister asked me to give you the necklace, so that you can forget about her. We are Xiannu. We can't get married. Hearing this, Chen-Shi said as he cleaned up. Ying knows about this rule, right? But she still chose to give birth to Nian, which means that she doesn't want to be a Xiannu, right? Qin Shueqing didn't reply. When Chen-Shi looked at her, her eyes were also a little evasive, as if she didn't dare to look at Chen-Shi. Since Ying doesn't want to be a Xiannu, do you think I should take her home? Hearing this, Qin Shueqing suddenly became anxious and couldn't help but exclaim, no, you can't go. You'll kill my sister. Kill her? No, I'm going to take her home. Qin Shueqing was a little agitated and wanted to say something more. But at this time, Chen-Shi suddenly waved his sleeve. Then her whole body flew straight out of the courtyard like a kite, and then suspended in the middle of the courtyard, unable to move. After binding her in the middle of the courtyard, Chen-Shi slowly walked out of the west wing. He raised his head and looked at Qin Shueqing calmly. After a moment of silence, Chen-Shi asked calmly, tell me, where is Ying? Qin Shueqing hesitated for a moment, but still chose to shut up. However, Chen-Shi's next sentence suddenly made her face change greatly. If you don't say it, I'll burn you now. Chen-Shi's appearance didn't change at all, and his expression was still calm. But Qin Shueqing seemed to feel that the man standing in front of her now, he was like a wolf that had taken off its sheepskin, completely revealing the ferocious nature in his bones. Well, I'm different from most writers because I can't stand trolls. I've been a failure for a long time, so I won't condone trolls acting presumptuously in front of me. There was already a wave of trolls when the female lead was in the lead role. And now there's another wave of trolls for my sister-in-law. Forcibly whitewashing. Lowering IQ? Illogical? Explaining too much will disgust other readers. So I won't open a chapter to explain the motives of my sister-in-law's behavior. The following is the extras. Chen-Shi took the little fellow to play the single plank bridge. Halfway through, the little fellow felt it was very simple. So she asked Chen-Shi to let go of her, and she wanted to walk by herself. Chen-Shi couldn't persuade her, so he had to let go of her. The little fellow tried to take a step or two. She found it was very simple. So she was a little proud. She wanted to jump directly to the opposite side. But just as she was jumping happily, her feet suddenly slipped and she accidentally fell down. The little fellow fell to the ground and hurt, and immediately cried loudly, constantly blaming Chen-Shi for not holding her properly. Seeing this, Chen-Shi had to hold the little fellow tightly, comforting her with a guilty face. Nian, I'm sorry, it's all Dad's fault. Dad didn't take good care of you. Dad apologizes to you, okay? Chapter 105. The biggest difference between the heavenly jade world and Earth was spirit stones, immortal herbs, cave abodes, and spirit veins could be snatched. Interest was the driving force behind all human actions. Marx once said, "Everything that people strive for is related to their interests." Chunshi had lived on Earth for more than 20 years. But he had lived in the heavenly jade world for more than 500 years. Could it be that those 500 years could not compare to 20 years? Obviously not. The reason why he did not like the heavenly jade world was mainly because there was a fundamental difference between the heavenly jade world and Earth. Earth was the place where he was born and raised. Chunshi grew up and matured here. His outlook on life, values, and worldview had formed the most basic framework because of this. So after he went to the heavenly jade world, he always felt that he did not fit in with that world. This was also one of the reasons why he risked his life to return to his roots. 3 years old is old, 7 years old is old. This was a proverb in Wuxia. Although 3 years old and 7 years old was only an approximate number in ancient times, it was summed up by the people of Wuxia after thousands of years of living experience. This sentence seemed very arbitrary, but it was proven to be reasonable by modern science. Man is a very complicated creature. If he really wanted to explore it in detail, he would have to talk about innate determinants and acquired influences. That was too complicated, and Chunshi was not a thinker, so he would not study too much. He only needed to clarify one thing, and that was, what exactly did he want? Chunshi did not want longevity, but family happiness. This was his goal, and also his pursuit. At the same time, it was the source of his motivation. Nianyan was already by his side, so Chunshi swore to make her the happiest child in the world. But Yingying was still missing. Without Yingying, how could Nianyan be the happiest child in the world? Without Yingying, how would he be able to achieve the family happiness that he pursued? Without Yingying, how could he fulfill the promise he made back then? I will ascend and become an immortal. Not for longevity, but for a lifetime of happiness and peace. If it was said that living on Earth for more than 20 years had established a basic framework for Chunshi's worldview. However, the 500 years in heavenly spiral had reshaped Chunshi's code of conduct. In the end, he was no longer a mortal. He was a titled divine lord of the heavenly jade domain, a soul formation cultivator. Therefore, when Chunshi heard that Yingying was in danger, there was only one thought left in his mind. Pick up Yingying and go home. The home that he guarded. Compared to his wife, his sister-in-law was naturally an insignificant existence. Therefore, Qin Xueqing was suddenly thrown out of the yard. She stared at the man in horror. This seemingly gentle man suddenly showed his ferocious side in front of her. That monstrous murderous aura seemed to be making a silent declaration. If she dared to say no, he would really kill her. Qin Xueqing was scared out of her wits. Chunshi stood on the steps and quietly looked at Qin Xueqing, who was tied up in the air by him. All of a sudden his wrist twitched. Immediately after, a small flame jumped out from his fingertip. Seeing the sudden flame, Qin Xueqing finally came back to her senses. This cheap brother-in-law was serious about her. Qin Xueqing was scared. When she saw that Chunshi was about to throw out the flame, she immediately shouted at the top of her lungs, "No! I'll tell you." Classic of Mountains and Seas? The 16th classic of the West of the Great Wilderness said, "In the south of the West Sea, on the shore of quicksand, behind the red water and before the black water, there is a mountain called the Kunlun Hills." The Kunlun Mountains were known as the ancestor of all mountains in Wuxia, and the source of the dragon veins. Many legends in Wuxia were related to the Kunlun Mountains, but many people didn't know. The Kunlun Mountains in ancient times and the Kunlun Mountains in modern times were actually two different places. Some people even thought that the ancient Kunlun Mountains were the current Kunlun Mountains. The current Kunlun Mountains were between 500 meters and 6,000 meters above sea level. The climate was cold and humid, the air was thin, and there was a plateau layer of frozen soil all year round. The living conditions were extremely bad. How could the Wuxia people be born? In fact, according to historical records, long before the Qin dynasty unified Wuxia, what was called the Kunlun Mountains was actually the Qinling Mountains. The Guanzhong Plain north of the Qinling Mountains was the birthplace of the Wuxia people. The two ancestors of the Wuxia people, the Yellow Emperor and the Yin Emperor, were born in this place. The Guoyujin language said. In the past, Xiaodian married the Eugene family and gave birth to the Yellow Emperor and the Yin Emperor. The Yellow Emperor was born with Ji Shui, and the Yin Emperor was born with Jiang Shui. Therefore, the Yellow Emperor was born with Ji Shui, and the Yin Emperor was born with Jiang Shui. The two emperors used their masters to help each other, and they were born with different virtues. This was also the earliest historical record of the Yin Emperor and the Yellow Emperor that could be seen. The Qinling Mountains were not called Qinling Mountains in the beginning. At first, it was called the Kunlun Mountains. Later, Qin Shi Huang unified Wuxia and moved the capital to Xianying. Because the Qinling Mountains stood in the south of Xianying, the capital of the Qin state, there was a saying, "In the sky, in the south of the capital," so it was called Zhongnan, also known as Zhongnan. Therefore, the Qinling Mountains were called Zhongnan Mountains. Later the Qin dynasty fell, and it was the Western Han dynasty. Sima Qian wrote in the history books, "The Qinling Mountains are the greatest obstacle in the world." At this time, the Qinling Mountains finally had its official name. Kunlun Mountains, Zhongnan Mountains, Qinling Mountains. These were the past and present lives of the Qinling Mountains. Huaxia's dragon vein was actually here. Chang'an. At the airport exit. A family of 3 and a cat. The man was handsome, the woman was beautiful, and the baby was quite cute. Even the cat in the child's arms looked more agile and clever. It stuck its head out and looked at the passers-by. The family of 3 did not look like locals. After getting off the exit, they took a taxi and went straight to the Qinling Mountains. The Qinling Mountains were a huge mountain range across Wuxia. At the same time, it was also the climate dividing line between the north and south of Wuxia. The difference in the lives of southerners and northerners was formed by this mountain range. Every winter, the Guangzhong area north of the Qinling Mountains was bitterly cold. Thousands of miles of ice would be frozen and thousands of miles of snow would fall. People would stay by the fire to get through this cold season. However, the Hanzhong Basin south of the Qinling Mountains was still green with mountains and rivers. This mountain range had a decisive impact on the natural climate of Wuxia. It was also this mountain range that changed the natural pattern of Wuxia. The family of 3 booked a taxi. They were not going to a scenic area, but to a remote town at the foot of the Qinling Mountains. The people of northern Shaanxi were forthright, the people of southern Shaanxi were simple and honest, and the people of Guangzhong were warm. This trip would take more than 2 hours. It was a long journey. The driver wanted to start a conversation several times, but the young couple in the car was like a sulking couple. They did not say a word since they got in the car. There was no other way. Since the guests were not willing to talk, he could only keep his mouth shut silently. The straight-line distance from Chang and to the Qinling Mountains was only 50 to 60 kilometers. It had not snowed in Chang, and yet, but the Qinling Mountains had already turned into a vast expanse of white. The town they were going to was about 200 kilometers away from Chang'an. When they were about to reach the town, it started to drizzle. The weather was dark and the rain was hazy. There was also a thick fog on the mountain. When they looked up, they could only see a misty expanse. They had made a lot of money on this trip, so the driver was very polite and gave them an umbrella. He was also a little curious about this family of 3, so after he left, he glanced at them through the rearview mirror. There were some raindrops on the rearview mirror. Through the mirror, he saw the family of 3 slowly walking up the mountain path. Going up the mountain on such a cold day? Old man, don't rush me. I really can't write that much. Think about it. You know that I'm here to write books to make money. Do you think I can't live with the money? The background of this book is very large. The foreshadowing has to be linked together, so it's very difficult for me to write it. Please, can you please understand? Even if it's on Baidu, I have to check it one by one. After digesting it, I'll put it into my settings. This chapter contains too much information. I wrote until 3 a.m. last night, and woke up at 12 a.m. today. I've only just finished writing it now. After writing it, I still have to wait to be scolded for being a fake. Sometimes, I really feel that I've been wronged. Please, I hope you can understand. I've really worked very hard. I'll promote the book for you. There are 3 successful nanny dads on Chidian now. You can also read Nanny Dad's Literary Life and Nanny Dad's Restaurant in Another World. My speed can't be compared to theirs. Nanny Dad's Restaurant in Another World will be a hit. That's something I don't even dare to think about. Although we're all nannies, the things we write are actually different. Chapter 106. The Qinling Mountains lay across the border between the north and the south of Wuxia. It was the mountains that divided the north and the south, the earth cut the rivers, and the east and west meandered. The vast momentum and continuous magnificence made it difficult for people to see the whole picture, but they had to explore. The world was big and chaotic. It was rare that the mountains were still there. The fog was rising, and the snow was boundless. It was an otherworldly scene. Unlike the handsomeness of Mount Amei, the Qinling Mountains gave people a sense of vastness. After going up the mountain, the little fellow obediently lay in Chunxi's arms, her big eyes rolling. As the altitude increased, the snow on the mountain became thicker and thicker. The somewhat rugged and slippery path was gradually covered by the snow. Looking up, it seemed that there was only white left between heaven and earth. When the little fellow saw the thick snow piled up like a quilt, she finally couldn't help but hug Chunxi's neck and said coquettishly, "Papa, Papa, I want to play in the snow." Hearing this, Chunxi stopped, pinched her little face, and then put her down in a relatively flat place. Seeing the thick layer of snow in front of her, the little fellow also became playful. She was holding the big cat and suddenly swung her arms with all her strength. Just like that, he threw the big cat into the pile of snow. The big cat was shocked, and suddenly it was so scared that it waved its 4 feet in the air. But because it had no place to borrow strength, it could only watch as the little fellow threw it out. Poof! It was now the size of a pet cat, so after falling into the snow, it only made a small shallow hole. Meow! The big cat cried out with some dissatisfaction, causing the little fellow to giggle. Then she hopped to the edge of the pile of snow and shouted, "I'm here!" Then he jumped into the snow as well. The snow looked as soft as cotton, but it was definitely not as warm and cold as cotton. But after she jumped into the snow, she immediately rolled in it, as if she was not afraid of the cold at all. Her wish of rolling in the snow finally came true. While Little Rascal and Big Cat were rolling around in the snow, Chunxi looked at Qin Shiweqing and suddenly asked, "What do you think? Is my daughter cute?" This was the second time that Chunxi had asked this question. Qin Shiweqing looked at him with a complicated expression, and then turned her eyes to the little fellow. A 4-year-old child was the cutest, so no matter how unwilling she was, Qin Shiweqing could only reply dryly, "Cute." "Thank you." Chunxi smiled and nodded, as if he was very satisfied with her answer. Qin Shiweqing wanted to say something, but when she thought about how Chunxi had threatened to burn her to death, she couldn't help but sulk. She walked to the side alone and sulked. The conversation stopped abruptly. The huge mountain was very quiet. Only the little fellow's shouts could be heard. The cold wind in the mountain whistled, and a series of snowflakes swirled in the sky, drifting toward the foot of Mount Qinling. After playing for a while, the little fellow found that it was really cold, so she ran back. "Papa, it's so cold, so cold." As she spoke, she jumped and shivered. The process of melting snow itself was a process of absorbing heat. When rolling in the snow would fall into the clothes. As soon as it met the body temperature, it would immediately melt into water. So no matter how much she liked the snow, she had to run back to Chunxi to get warm. Chunxi quickly picked her up. As his true essence surged, Little Rascal's body immediately emitted a faint white gas. A stream of warmth wrapped her, and Little Rascal immediately murmured comfortably, "It's so warm. Papa is so warm." When it could freeload food and drink, Big Cat would never be willing to fall behind others. So when it saw Little Rascal being held by Chunxi, it immediately shook off the snow on its body and jumped into Little Rascal's arms like a mad dog. The reason why it was willing to follow Chunxi was that a trace of Chunxi's true essence inadvertently leaked out was enough for it to benefit a lot. When the heavy snow closed the mountain, there were no birds in the mountains, and no traces of people could be found. But even a master of peak strength could walk on water, not to mention Qin Shiweqing, who was a guru. Perhaps it was because she wanted to compete with Chen Shi, so as soon as she entered the mountain, she stepped on the snow and floated away. In an instant, she had already rushed several meters away. A guru was like a dragon, climbing the mountain like an ape, diving into the water like an otter, and his momentum was like Mount Tai. After being tortured by Chen Shi, Qin Xueqing almost doubted whether she was still a Wu Dao guru. Now that his sister-in-law was willing to cooperate, Chen Shi naturally would not provoke her for no reason, so he followed her leisurely. As the two of them moved forward quickly, they went deep into the hinterland of the Qinling Mountains in the blink of an eye. At this time, Chen Shi also roughly guessed where the mysterious place she was talking about was. Because as they went deeper and deeper, Chen Shi found that the spiritual qi of heaven and earth here was even richer than that of Zongnanhai. It was really a good place for all things to compete. After walking for more than an hour, Qin Xueqing suddenly stopped. Chen Shi looked at the valley in front of her and also stopped, because he knew that Qin Xueqing had something to say. Sure enough, after Qin Xueqing stopped, she turned her head, and the expression on her face showed that she was struggling. Chen Shi waited for her for a moment. Then she said in a seemingly annoyed tone, "I was wrong. I shouldn't have brought you here. Even if you kill me now, I won't take you one step further. Without me leading the way, you won't be able to enter, so you should go back. Since we're already here, do you think it's possible for me to go back? You really can't go any further. If you do this, not only will you kill yourself and my sister, but you will also kill the child in your arms. For the sake of the child, please go back, okay? Go back first, and when the divine gate opens, I will naturally come back to find you." Qin Xueqing became more and more agitated as she spoke. In the end, she could not help but yell at Chen Shi again. Chen Shi did not reply. After she calmed down a little, he nodded at Qin Xueqing and said very solemnly, "Thank you." "You." Qin Xueqing was stunned for a moment. Then she flew into a rage, and her face turned red. Just as she was about to scold Chen Shi suddenly asked, "You're a grandmaster, so what's the corresponding realm of a grandmaster? I don't have time to joke with you. I'm warning you, if you go any further, you will really kill everyone. Answer my question first." Chen Shi's expression was very serious, as if he was seriously discussing something with her. Seeing this, Qin Xueqing stomped her foot and said impatiently, "Entering the Tao. What's above that? Cultivating the Tao. Above that? Aren't you at the divine connection realm? Answer my question first, then what's above that? Core condensation. Isn't Grandmaster controlled Dan? What's the difference between core controlled Dan and core condensation? The two can't be described in the same sentence. Legend has it that when a Grandmaster successfully condenses his Dan, he will be able to leave the earth and ascend to immortality, free and unfettered between heaven and earth. Core concentration refers to a martial artist condensing the essence, qi, and blood marrow of the entire body into a single point. In other words, all the strength in the body is concentrated in the dantian. When facing an enemy, the dantian will explode, and the enemy will be killed in a single move. Alright, I have no more questions. After saying that, Chen Shi carried the little fellow and walked towards the valley. Qin Xueqing wanted to reach out and stop him, but when she thought about how she was not a match for him, she could not help but stop. Obviously, Chen Shi had tortured her until she was traumatized. Helpless, Qin Xueqing could only stomp her foot and shout at Chen Shi's back, "I've said it before, without me leading the way, you can't enter." Just as she finished speaking, the scene in front of her stunned her. Chen Shi waved his sleeves lightly, and a door of light rippled like the surface of a lake appeared in front of him. Behind the door, at the entrance of the valley, a stone tablet suddenly appeared in the originally empty space. On the stone tablet were two large words written in small seal script. Chapter 107. The little fellow stared blankly at the light gate that suddenly appeared in front of her. This door of light was transparent. If it wasn't for the faint light it was emitting and the ripples it was emitting, it would really look like an ordinary glass door. Even an adult would not be able to understand this situation, let alone a 4-year-old girl. "Papa, what's this?" The little girl stared at Chunxi with her cute big eyes, and after looking at Chunxi with a surprised expression, she stretched out her left index finger and gently poked at the door of light. Then, when her finger touched the light gate, she felt nothing. It was as if she was touching air. Her finger went through the light gate as if she was putting her hand into water. The surface of the water kept shaking, and her fingers started to shake as well. The light gate shook, and so did her finger. The little fellow was amused. She stretched out her finger and kept poking the light gate. She felt nothing, but when she saw her finger rippling with the ripples, she giggled happily. Looking at her happy little face, Chunxi couldn't help but ask with a smile, "Do you like it?" "I like it. It's so fun." The little fellow giggled and lay on Chunxi's arm. Then she raised her head high, and her little chin was almost in the sky. "Papa will take you in to play, okay?" "Okay." The father and daughter quickly reached a consensus. Then Chunxi looked back at Qin Xueqing and asked with a smile, "What about you? Do you want to go with us?" Qin Xueqing looked at him in a daze. This mountain guarding formation was left by the ancient sages. How could it fail? Chunxi looked at her strangely. Seeing that she didn't speak, he stepped directly into the light gate with the little fellow in his arms. "Wait. I'll go with you." At this time, Qin Xueqing suddenly reacted and ran after him. "I'll take you in. But you'd better leave her here. Don't you still have a monster? If you let this monster keep an eye on her, there shouldn't be any problem. I'll go in with you. It'll be more convenient for us to move around." Qin Xueqing pointed at the big cat in the little fellow's arms, trying to persuade Chunxi to leave the little fellow outside. Hearing this, Chunxi gently shook his head and answered with certainty, "Yingying is my wife and Yanyan's mother. Since it's to bring her mother home, how can she be absent?" After that, Chunxi lowered his head and glanced at the little fellow. Although the little fellow did not understand the meaning of Qin Xueqing, she understood the meaning of Chunxi's words. Therefore she immediately said excitedly, "I want to take Mama home." As she spoke, the little girl seemed to be a little embarrassed. She buried her little face in Chunxi's chest. Bashfully sitting in Chunxi's arms, she kept twisting her small body. The word mother had already become a simple concept in her mind. Other children had mothers, so naturally, she should have a mother too. This was all she knew about her mother. Although she was a little unfamiliar with it, she still had some desire. Chunxi touched the little fellow's head and smiled at Qin Xueqing. He carried the little fellow and walked straight to the valley in front. Qin Xueqing's expression was a little uncertain. While she was still hesitating, Chunxi was almost at the side of the stone tablet. Seeing this, Qin Xueqing could only stomp her feet and shout, "Wait! I'll take you there." After saying that, she also stepped through the door of light. When she stepped through the door of light, it suddenly disappeared. Qin Xueqing looked at the original position of the light door with a complicated expression. After shaking her head, she quickly caught up with Chunxi. After passing the stone tablet, they entered the valley. A seemingly ancient village suddenly appeared in front of Chunxi. It was as if it was recorded in the peach blossom spring. After dozens of steps, it suddenly became clear. The land was flat, and the houses were upright. There were fertile fields, beautiful ponds, mulberry trees and bamboo trees. The roads were crisscrossed, and chickens and dogs could be heard. However, it was a pity that it was winter now, and snow was falling from the sky. Therefore, standing outside the village, there was no one at all. Qin Xueqing came from behind. After passing by Chunxi, she led Chunxi quietly into the village. This village was actually very big, and there were probably hundreds of families. Qin Xueqing's pretty face was tense, and she was almost in her battle state. Along the way, she had clearly stepped on the snow, but she did not leave any footprints. Looking at her cautious appearance, she was no different from a thief. The village was very quiet. At this time, the little fellow turned her little head and said with some doubts, "Papa, it's so strange here." Her voice was not loud, but in Qin Xueqing's ears, it was no different from a sudden clap of thunder. Hence, she was immediately given a huge fright as every strand of hair on her body stood on end. Qin Xueqing quickly turned her head and glared at the little fellow fiercely. Being glared at so fiercely, the little fellow was a little frightened. She quickly pouted and shrank into Chenxi's arms. Seeing this, Chenxi also glared at Qin Xueqing fiercely. At the same time, he did not forget to threaten her. If you dare to glare at her again, I will gouge out your eyes. You. Qin Xueqing was just about to say something, but she immediately realized that now was not the time to quarrel. Therefore, she had to take a deep breath and suppress the evil fire in the bottom of her heart. At this time, Chenxi ignored her and continued to walk forward. Seeing this, Qin Xueqing suddenly became anxious. She quickly floated in front of Chenxi and pointed to a side path, indicating that he should go around it. However, Chenxi did not pay attention to her at all. He carried the little fellow and walked straight ahead. There was a large square in the center of the village. It was about the size of 2 basketball courts. In the center, there was an ancient bronze cauldron about 2 meters high. Because of the heavy snow, the ancient cauldron had been covered with a thick layer of snow. There were even a few icicles hanging from the protruding ears of the cauldron. In the north of the square, there was an old building that looked like an ancestral hall. The door of the old building was closed tightly, and it looked quite solemn and solemn. Chenxi did not seem to need Qin Xueqing to lead the way. After arriving at the square, he went straight through the square, and then walked quickly up the mountain along a small path in the northwest corner of the square. Qin Xueqing followed behind him, looking nervous. She wanted to say something, but she did not dare to make a sound. She wanted to stop Chenxi, but she was afraid that she would be made by Chenxi again. So she had to follow Chenxi helplessly, constantly looking around, for fear that someone would discover them. Behind the ancestral hall, there was a small hill, estimated to be about 20 or 30 meters high. There was only a winding path to go up. Chenxi came to the foot of the hill and looked at the small hill thoughtfully. When he saw the circle of walls on the hill, there were some subtle changes in his eyes. Qin Xueqing noticed Chenxi's strange behavior. Just as she was about to approach Chenxi and was about to say something to him, Chenxi suddenly carried the little fellow and flew straight up. Qin Xueqing hesitated for a moment, but it was too late for her to regret it now. So she had to look as if she was facing death calmly, and quickly jumped up with Chenxi. Again, it's not a matter of money. It's that I really can't write it. Even if I write something, it never reaches the feeling I want. The more I write, the more dissatisfied I am. I delete and rewrite and still not satisfied, delete and rewrite again. In short, it's up to me if I can get through this. I've forgotten to thank all the bosses for their 10,000 coin rewards. Now that they're all together. Thank you to the boss of a mess for your 10,000 reward. Thank you to the boss of Xiaozhongyu for your 20,000 reward. Thank you to the boss of Little Devil Child and Little Urchin for your 10,500 reward. Thank you to brother Katitsumuri for your 10,000 reward. Thank you to the boss of Sanyu Wu Mengsheng for your 10,000 reward. Thank you to the boss of God with Nothing to Do for your 9,000 reward. Thank you to the boss of Riding a Turtle to the Heavens for your 11,500 reward. Thank you to the boss of Rising Dawn, Withering Summer Flowers for your 10,000 reward. Thank you to the boss of Sanhuafeng for your 10,000 reward. Chapter 108. Chenxi had already flown with the little fellow once, so this time she didn't seem to be too excited. There was only a small courtyard on the hillside behind the ancestral hall. Chenxi didn't fly directly into the courtyard. Instead, he stopped outside the door. Inside and outside the door. Inside and behind the wall. The little fellow seemed to have noticed something. She tilted her head and glanced at Chenxi, only to find that her father's lips were tightly pursed. He seemed to be a little nervous. So she wrapped her arms around Chenxi's neck and slowly pressed her ear against Chenxi's chest, as if she wanted to hear his heartbeat. Chenxi didn't hesitate too much. He waved his arm gently, and the courtyard door opened automatically. Small courtyard, pavilion. Stone table, guqin. She was dressed in white, standing in the snow, looking up at the sky in a daze. The woman heard the movement, and slowly turned her head to look at the courtyard door. Immediately after, the sorrow on her face turned into astonishment. But after a moment, those astonishment all turned into uncontrollable excitement and anger. She wanted to see that familiar face again, but the tears that she couldn't help blurred her eyes in the blink of an eye. Ying, I'm sorry. Chunshi held the little girl in her arms and strode towards her, shrinking the ground into an inch. In a flash, the little fellow curled up in Chunshi's arms. Although her face was a little timid, her big eyes were still staring straight at the woman in white in front of her. The woman didn't seem to be prepared. In the blink of an eye, Chunshi, who was standing outside the courtyard just now, appeared in front of her at this moment. This frightened her so much that she couldn't help but take a step back. Ying, it's me. I'm back. Chunshi held the little fellow in one hand and pulled her with the other. However, what he got in response was a resounding slap. Slap. The woman didn't speak. After glancing at him, she quickly lowered her head to look at the little fellow in his arms. The tears that had already welled up in her eyes suddenly gushed out crazily as if a dam had been opened. She no longer paid attention to Chunshi, but looked at the little guy in his arms. Nian, is that you? The woman looked at the little fellow in Chunshi's arms. When she saw the little fellow's cute little face, she couldn't help but smile as she cried. She stretched out her trembling hands, wanting to take the little fellow from Chunshi's arms. However, the little fellow shyly hugged Chunshi and twisted his body to avoid the woman's hand. That nervous and uneasy look was just like the first time Chunshi saw her. When the woman saw the little fellow's confused and nervous expression, she felt as if her heart had been ruthlessly stabbed by a knife. That heart-wrenching pain was almost unbearable. How can she be a mother if she doesn't raise her child? That was why her daughter was so unfamiliar with her when she was already so old. This was retribution. Seeing this, Chunshi hurriedly said to the little fellow, Nian, call me mommy. Do you remember what mommy looks like? Do you remember that you've been looking at family photos every day? Think about it. This is mommy. The little fellow clutched Chunshi's clothes tightly. She looked uneasily at the crying woman in front of her. She hesitated for a moment. Then she suddenly stretched out her little hand to the woman and said softly, Mommy. The woman was stunned, as if she couldn't believe her ears. Seeing this, the little fellow raised her voice and shouted again, Mommy, hug. The woman trembled and stretched out her hands again. And this time, the little fellow took the initiative to reach out her hands to her. She stiffly took the little fellow from Chunshi's arms. The little fellow wrapped her arms around her neck. Seeing that her tears were still flowing, she stretched out her little hand to wipe her face and said very sensibly, Mommy, don't cry. You won't be beautiful if you cry. The woman stared blankly at the little fellow, quietly feeling the warmth from her hands, but her tears still fell uncontrollably. The little fellow wiped her tears. Seeing that she was still crying, she wrapped her arms around her neck and leaned on her body, saying softly, Mommy is a great beauty. Don't cry. You won't be beautiful if you cry. If Mommy isn't beautiful, I won't be beautiful when I grow up. The child was so sensible. The woman suddenly broke down. She hugged the little fellow tightly and slowly squatted on the ground. Her crying was so heart-wrenching, as if she was a Xianglin sister-in-law whose child was taken away by a wolf. It was so sad that it could break one's heart. The little fellow was very sensible. She hugged the woman and comforted her. Mommy, don't cry, don't cry. As she spoke, she used her little hand to gently pat the woman's back. Chunshi stood silently by the side, looking at his lover's crying appearance. He couldn't help but have mixed feelings. Time had faded her immaturity and draped her with a trace of vicissitudes of life. He couldn't avoid that slap. Qingruoying. Qingruoying. Perhaps the little fellow's comforting words were effective. The woman gradually stopped crying. After calming herself down, she gently let go of the little fellow. Then she held her hand and stood up again. Her eyes were slightly red, and when she looked at the little fellow, her eyes were filled with love. But when she looked at Chunshi, her gaze became very complicated. After hesitating for a moment, she said softly, Why do you want to leave? Her voice was very soft, and it sounded as if there were no emotions. Chunshi's heart immediately rose to his throat. After hesitating for a moment, Chunshi suddenly formed a seal, then lightly tapped the woman's forehead. The woman was stunned. Then, the huge amount of memories crazily rushed into her mind like a tide. Heavenly Jade World. Heavenly Yen Divine Sect. Servant Disciple. Chunxi at that time. Hesitation, struggle, helplessness, loss, but most of all, pain. It seemed like a simple move, but because Chunxi forcefully used his soul, he immediately suffered a backlash, and he couldn't help but let out a muffled groan. After hearing Chunxi's groan, Qin Ruoying immediately reacted and hurriedly shouted, "That's enough!" Seeing him in pain, she couldn't help but cry anxiously. Chunxi's first few years of memories in Heavenly Jade World also made her finally understand. What exactly had he experienced all these years? "I miss you so much." Qin Ruoying threw herself into Chunxi's arms, then leaned her head on his chest, and tears fell like rain. Chunxi gently hugged her. She raised her head and looked at Chunxi's face, which had become much paler in an instant, and couldn't help but murmur, "Do you know? After you left, I made a wish." Hearing this, Chunxi could only endure the pain caused by using his soul, and reluctantly asked, "What wish?" "I wish that after leaving for half your life, you'll return as a young man." Her gaze was as clear as that day on Middle Mountain Road. There were tears at the corners of her eyes, but she suddenly smiled. Yingying's smile was charming. Seeing this, Chunxi smiled with her. It was as if he had returned to the summer when he mustered the courage to confess his love. "Everything is as you wish." With that, Chunxi gently pulled Qin Ruoying into his arms. He lowered his head and gently kissed those two slightly cold red lips. This kiss was 5 years apart. This kiss was 500 years apart. "From now on, I only wish to be with you for the rest of my life." Qin Xueqing stood outside the courtyard, not daring to enter. When she saw the two of them kissing, she seemed to finally understand something. 2 lines of clear tears kept falling down her cheeks, but the corners of her mouth raised slightly. But at this moment, an angry voice suddenly sounded. "Yuanqing, what are you doing?" The smile on Qin Xueqing's face immediately disappeared. She retreated to the courtyard, somewhat afraid. And this also alarmed the two of them who were having an intimate moment in the courtyard. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying suddenly remembered something, and hurriedly pulled Chunxi to the house next door. "Quick, take Nian and leave first." At this moment, her face was full of panic, and there was no trace of happiness and sweetness on her face. However, at this moment, Chunxi gently held her hand and said very gently, "Don't be afraid, I'm here." Qin Ruoying still wanted to say something, but Chunxi pulled her into his arms and blocked her words with his mouth. "Papa, you're shameless." "Shame, shame, shame." The little fellow was held by Qin Ruoying. As soon as she saw Chunxi kissing her again, she immediately giggled excitedly. "Are you crazy? Why are you still here?" Qin Xueqing suddenly rushed over and tried to push Chunxi away, but before she could get close, she had been restrained by Chunxi again. Then Chunxi gently let go of Qin Ruoying, and then asked very seriously, "Since I'm here, I must take you home today. Yingying, do you believe me?" Qin Ruoying was stunned for a moment. However, she quickly nodded her head and replied solemnly, "I believe you." Chunxi gently touched her face, and then bent down to pick up the little fellow. He held the little fellow in his left hand, and held Qin Ruoying in his right hand. The family of 3 faced the gate of the courtyard like this. There were more and more people outside the courtyard. In the end, even an old man with white hair and beard was alarmed. As soon as the old man walked into the courtyard, he saw Chunxi's unfamiliar face. And when he saw the little fellow in Chunxi's arms, he couldn't help but change his expression greatly. He pointed at the little fellow and scolded sternly, "Who is she?" Chunxi silently looked at everyone in front of him. Finally, his eyes stopped on the old man. Then he turned to the big cat and said, "Big cat." The big cat had been squatting nearby and watching the fun. After hearing Chunxi's voice, it immediately jumped out and responded with a meow. "Get the carriage." "Meow?" The big cat tilted its head, as if it didn't understand. "Let's go home." His voice was as loud as a bell and as loud as thunder. The negative emotions that had accumulated for more than 500 years finally broke out at this moment. This is the last chapter before the release. The next chapter will be released on January 1st, 2018 at 5 o'clock. After the female lead comes out, I think I still have a conscience. It's still the same sentence. Don't force people to donate monthly votes, and let fate decide. Everyone has a difficult time. If you have money, you can help others, but if you don't, you can help others. Friends who watch pirated versions, remember to come back and give me 2 recommendation votes. It's a kind of support. As for those who don't have anything and still want to talk nonsense after watching it for free, forget it, I won't say it. This chapter's BGM. The Snow Between the Eyebrows Swordnet-san's love song was changed into an official video by Swordnet-san. Countless people cried after listening to it. I strongly recommend you to listen to the story version, not the pure song version. And I'm in Shuangming Town, my name is West Window White, Pure Yang. But I miss you, it's useless to know. Not throwing you away, but finding you in dreams. After waking up, I'm on the balcony with dreams. West Window White, the cold moon, a yard full of snow. The first chapter, the sword has not been properly equipped but I'm already in Jianghu, and, the second chapter, the wine is still warm, but I don't know the universe, to be continued. Chapter 109. It's up. Let's not talk about empty words. I'm trying my best to write as much as I can. I've saved a chapter and a half and will publish it after midnight. Anyway, I'll just write as much as I can today. I won't compete with others because I really can't write. There's only one sentence. I can't give you the quantity, but I can give you the quality. So I hope you can give me your support and understanding, okay? For example, come and spend a dime to give me a first order? That's not too much. Thank you for your support, especially those who supported the original version. And every single one of them who had tipped and supported. Heart to heart. I'll say the same thing. I don't mind pirated readers, but I'll try my best to encourage you to read the original version. Those who have money will support me, and those who don't will support me. Everyone has their difficulties, so I won't reject pirated readers. I won't open an anti-piracy website. I won't sell myself as poor or miserable, because I've been writing novels for more than 10 years. Except for this one, I haven't even earned back the courier fees for the others. If I don't find a job, I'm afraid I'll starve to death. Well, I've opened a takeaway shop before, so I know a lot about takeaway. So I don't understand what some authors are thinking. They can't even afford to eat, so why don't they go out to work? If they go out to work and improve themselves in society, the things they write should be better than writing behind closed doors, right? Anyway, that's how I got through. Once this book is up, I should be able to get rid of the title of flop. Thank you, all of you. Without you, I wouldn't be able to make a comeback today. You've also made me feel what it means to be pushed to the top. In 2005, I started my first book on Qidian. I wrote more than 100,000 words, but I didn't sign a contract. For the past 12 years, I'll write and submit when I'm free to see if I can sign a contract. The first time I signed a contract was in 2010. The longest book was more than 700,000 words. There were 2 subscriptions and each of them was 13. Xuanhuan, fantasy, xianxia, sci-fi, urban, supernatural, including female genre and countless subcategories. I've written about everything except history and military affairs, which I haven't really written about yet. They all flopped. This book was also the first time I was pushed to the top by Sanjiang. I just want to encourage all of you. Please believe that God won't let you down. Your hard work today will pay off one day. It may be late, but it will never be absent. Let's talk about this book. I want to write a book that you will still talk about years later. No matter how many flaws it has, it is a work that I have put my heart and soul into. To be honest, I've already written so much that I've cried several times. What he had written had moved him to tears. Thinking about it, it was really strange. A lot of readers, actually they're just posers, after reading the first chapter, scolded me for writing old-fashioned stuff, and started scolding me after reading 10 lines at a glance. To be honest, they might look down on my first chapter and think that my first chapter is very old-fashioned. But in fact, when I finished the first chapter, I had already cried. At that time, I had a very strange feeling. I was neither happy nor sad. There were clearly no fluctuations in my emotions, but I still shed tears. And that was only when I was writing the first chapter. Later, when I reached chapter 40, I cried again. At chapter 45, I also cried. However, many people praised chapter 55, saying that it was the highest quality chapter, but I didn't have any reaction. There were a few chapters after that. There were tears, but it wasn't enough. Until chapter 93. I was stuck at chapter 93 for a long time. But when I wrote the last paragraph, I shed tears again. If an author can write until they cry, I feel that I have succeeded. If it was an old author or an old reader, when they saw the title of my book, they could already come to a conclusion. This book has too many restrictions. Because the core of cultivation and stay-at-home dad are conflicting. One is to train and fight monsters, the other is to live a warm life. Also, the timeline of stay-at-home dad novels is very short, but the timeline of cultivation is thousands of years. To be able to write such a result was something that I didn't expect at all, so I didn't save any chapters. Every chapter was written and published on the spot. To be able to write and publish on the spot to reach this level, I'm actually very satisfied. If it wasn't serialized, I think I could write even better. Chapter 107, I'm very satisfied. I hope you leave for half your life and return as a teenager. I didn't dawdle for half a day in vain. From the perspective of making money, Chapter 107 shouldn't be a free chapter. If I were to open another book, I would definitely save 200,000 before publishing it. It's too difficult to not save any chapters. Let's talk about the update. I hope you can understand. I also want to write more, but I really can't do it. It's not that I'm not working hard, but I've already tried my best. To say something arrogant, I feel that the quality of my book is okay. For example, in chapter 97, when Ning Zhongguo called, I could actually choose to open a branch here and expand it into a complete set of pretentious face-slapping scenes. But I have other plots in my mind. I think the plots in my mind are more meaningful than these face-slapping scenes, so I don't want to write that. This also causes me to write very slowly, because I write every chapter very carefully, racking my brain to think about it. Even if it's a confirmed plot, I will repeatedly think about it, because I'm afraid I can't control it. My way of writing also causes a lot of people to just skim through it. They might not even notice some details. Of course, even if you skip some of the key things that I think are the starting point, it won't affect the subsequent reading. This is the charm of online literature. If it's not good, I'll skip it. There will always be something I like. If there's really nothing that attracts me, okay, I'll abandon the book. I'm not an illiterate. I used to write brainless novels. But now, since I've chosen this topic, I have to write it properly. It's really hard to write, much harder than routine novels. So, I'd rather write the background setting that you don't want to see the most, rather than write these small branches. I hope you can understand my thoughts. Please forgive me. 2 chapters a day. Try to keep it up. If you can write more, then add more. In any case, it's a serious promotion. In order to cherish this opportunity, I'll nag a bit more. Actually, I really didn't ask for recommendation tickets, rewards, or anything like that, so I'm very sorry for Jia and everyone's rewards. Other people have to add more chapters for rewards, but I don't have anything here, so I don't dare to ask for rewards or recommendations. It's not that I don't want to, it's that I don't dare. Because I don't have a way to add more chapters. Sorry. I'm very grateful for everyone's support, especially those who have been voting since I started writing tens of thousands of words. There are more and more voting IDs. I can actually see a few familiar ones. It's really deep. I was a failure in the past, so monthly votes are a very distant thing to me. So, even if I've been in a fight before, I've never cared about it. I don't dare to think about it. I'm a failure. Why think so much? The monthly votes are for me to play with. Because I'm too calm, even after achieving today's results, I still feel like I'm living in a dream. In the past, when I slept, there was still no change in my collection. But now, in the blink of an eye, my collection has increased again. It's all thanks to everyone's support that I can achieve today's results. Thank you. I may focus on different things from other authors. I prefer to pay attention to the reader's comments. So you often see me in the comments section, or when I open a chapter. I don't care too much about the results, but I care a lot about your comments. So when I see some people deliberately belittling my hard work, I get very angry. Especially those who say that it's highly toxic and has already been appraised. I'm really speechless. But I care a lot about the readers' comments, so I often get angry. One last thing. I'm a pure newbie author. I don't have any achievements from previous books, and I'm writing alone. I don't have any support from old readers. I don't have any author friends, and I don't have any data. My updates are so weak, but I can reach 50,000 favorites at Chidian with 200,000 words. How many are there? Some idiots say that I'm manipulating data. They don't know, but they pretend to know. The number of subscribers, the number of fans, these are all roughly proportional. Whether I'm manipulating or not, any old author will be able to tell at a glance. I have such good results. Why do I need to manipulate my results to court death? Use your poor brain. Since my first recommendation, I've always been the first in the category of new books, category strong recommendation, 6 bands, 3 rivers, bookshelves, strong recommendation. When have I ever lost? I don't have many recommendations, because I'm a newbie and it's a city category, so it's hard to get a recommendation, and the editor didn't give me any extra recommendations. So, thank you for your support, brothers. Without you, I wouldn't have achieved today's results. Thank you for giving a failure for more than 10 years a chance to make a comeback. Thank you. December 31st, 2017. Yours truly. Happy New Year. I hope that in the coming year, you and I will still be side by side. VIP Book Group. 517861243. Chapter 110. A lot of people suddenly poured into the yard. These people were either men or women, old or young. They stood near the gate of the yard, looking at the family of 3 in the yard with unkind expressions. An old man with white hair and beard pushed the crowd out. When he saw Chun-Shi holding the child in one hand and holding Qin Ruoying in the other, he was so angry that even his beard trembled. The old man's eyes flashed with a trace of fierceness. He pointed at the little fellow and said angrily, "Who is she?" In fact, did he still need to ask? So no one answered his question. Chun-Shi held Qin Ruoying's hand. He felt that Yingying's hand was a little cold, so he gently squeezed her hand, indicating that she should not be afraid. Although encouraged by Chun-Shi, Qin Ruoying still did not dare to look at the old man directly. She lowered her head slightly and bit her lips tightly. She seemed to be a little scared. After the old man finished asking, he kept staring at Qin Ruoying. However, Qin Ruoying did not dare to look at him at all. This also made the old man so angry that his beard trembled. When he pointed at Qin Ruoying and was about to scold her, Chun-Shi suddenly turned to the big cat and said, "Big cat, get the carriage. Let's go home." His voice was as loud as a bell and as loud as thunder. The big cat heard the voice and got up. It immediately jumped to Chun-Shi's side, and its body expanded rapidly. The deep cloud ink leopard showed its fangs. This sudden change also startled the old man, and a trace of surprise appeared on his face. He looked at the big cat and said with some surprise, "Monster?" The big cat suddenly changed back to its original form, and many people at the gate of the yard were frightened. Some people even immediately left the yard. However, the old man was only stunned for a moment. Then he suddenly burst out laughing. "Our village has never had a mountain guardian spirit beast. This old man has been traveling for more than 10 years, but still couldn't find one. I didn't expect that today. I would find it so easily." The big cat crouched beside Chun-Shi's feet and assumed a pouncing posture. This old man made it very unhappy, so it immediately roared at the old man, "Meow." The old man laughed and took a step forward. But at this time, a figure suddenly flew over from the mountain. After a few twists and turns, the figure suddenly appeared in the open space in the center of the courtyard. This was a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s. His temperament was refined, and he had a scholarly air about him. Third uncle. After the man arrived, he respectfully bowed to the old man. The old man glanced at him with some displeasure, but he still stopped. He flicked his sleeve and scolded, "Look at your good daughter." Hearing this, the middle-aged man slowly turned around and looked at Chun-Shi. After seeing him turn around, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but shout nervously, "Dad!" The man was Qin Yongyan. Qin Yongyan silently looked at Qin Ruoying, and then looked at Chun-Shi. Finally, his eyes fell on the little fellow in Chen Shi's arms. The little fellow was lying in Chen Shi's arms. Seeing Qin Yongyan looking at her, the little fellow was embarrassed and hid her little face in Chen Shi's arms. There were too many people here, and the little fellow had learned to be afraid of strangers. Qin Yongyan was silent for a long time. Then he sighed deeply, looked at Qin Ruoying with a complicated expression, and asked softly, "Yingying, is this your child? How old is she?" Qin Ruoying didn't speak. Chen Shi smiled and said, 4.5 years old. She will be 5 years old in summer. Qin Yongyan couldn't help shaking his head when he heard this. He seemed to be deeply moved as he sighed faintly, "So I'm already a grandfather." The grandfather and granddaughter met for the first time under such circumstances. The old man called third uncle was obviously not interested in seeing their family reunion, so he shouted again, "Qin Yongyan, let me ask you, Xian Nu had an affair with another man and gave birth to a bastard child. According to the ancestral rules, how should we punish her?" Qin Yongyan was stunned. He didn't turn around. Instead, he looked at Qin Ruoying and said in a low voice with a pained expression, "Fire." "Then why are you still standing there? Take them down." Qin Yongyan stood there with a complicated expression on his face. Qin Ruoying couldn't help crying when she saw him like this. She murmured sadly, "Dad, I'm sorry." As she spoke, she wanted to break free from Chen Shi's hand and rush over. However, Chen Shi held her tightly, ready to see Qin Yongyan's reaction. Although the person in front of him was his father-in-law. However, if he wanted to push Yingying into the fire pit, then don't blame Chen Shi for being ruthless. Qin Yongyan didn't respond. Third uncle waited for a while, but he still didn't move. He was so angry that he laughed and said, "What? You can't do it?" Qin Yongyan still didn't answer. Third uncle was furious when he saw this. He immediately shouted to the crowd behind him, "Xinghua Hian, take down this adulterous couple and that bastard child." As soon as he finished speaking, 2 figures suddenly rushed out from the crowd. "Old Qin, third uncle has given the order. Sorry to offend you." Zhao Xinghua, Li Hoan and Qin Yongyan. The 3 of them were the best of their generation, and it was hard to tell who was the better one. The stranger in front of them was obviously Qin Yongyan's son-in-law, and the girl was his granddaughter. Zhao Xinghua and Li Hin were not willing to participate in these trivial matters, but under the old man's orders, they had no choice but to act and capture this stranger who had suddenly intruded. The 2 of them jumped out of the crowd and went straight to Chen Shi. However, Qin Yongyan suddenly turned around and stood in front of them. Then he directly hit Zhao Xinghuai's back with his palm. "Old Qin you." Zhao Xinghua didn't expect that Qin Yongyan would dare to attack him in this situation. He was caught off guard and had to take the hit. Li Hoan saw this and immediately supported Zhao Xinghua. Then he started to fight with Qin Yongyan. The 3 of them were suddenly in a mess. Chen Shi saw this and immediately said to the big cat, "Big cat, go and help him." Meow. The big cat joined the fight. Li Hoan was forced to turn around and fight, which immediately relieved the pressure on Qin Yongyan. The big cat was a monster in the awakening realm, which was equivalent to the foundation establishment stage of cultivators. However, Li Hoan could fight with the big cat without being at a disadvantage. This also allowed Chen Shi to have the most direct judgment of their strength. Third uncle looked at the 3 of them with a gloomy face, but he didn't say anything to stop them. At this time, Chen Shi suddenly let go of Qin Ruoying's hand. He gently pinched the little girl's face, and then very gently handed the little girl to Qin Ruoying. The little girl was still a little unfamiliar with her mother, so she immediately grabbed Chen Shi and asked nervously, "Papa, what are you going to do?" "Papa is going to reason with them." "Good girl, you go to Mama." "Oh." The little girl nodded blankly. It was unknown whether she understood or not. Looking at the 3 of them suddenly fighting in front of her, the little girl thought that they were dancing. She tilted her head and thought for a while. She opened her mouth and was about to say something. However, Chen Shi suddenly used a meditation spell on the little girl's forehead. The little girl fell into a deep sleep. "Good girl, go to sleep. When you wake up, we will be home." Chen Shi gently touched her little face, and then touched Qin Ruoying's face. Qin Ruoying held his hand, and her face was full of worry. But at this time, Chunshi said to her with a smile, I'll take you home. Qin Ruoying was stunned. Yes. She nodded heavily and hugged the little guy in her arms even tighter. Chunshi took back his hand, turned around and took a step forward. Behind him, it was his wife and child, and his sister-in-law who couldn't speak or move and could only be anxious. In front of him, it was a group of strangers led by the old man. The old man looked at him and was about to ask someone to take him down. Chunshi suddenly opened his mouth and said 2 words softly. Sword come. He raised his right hand and grasped in the air. The wind and snow all over the sky seemed to hear his call. Like a dragon dancing, the wind and snow came with great momentum. The snow floated to Chunshi's hand and instantly condensed into ice. In the blink of an eye, a 3-foot-long sword condensed by ice appeared in his hand. With the sound of a sword, the wind and snow came. I stand with a sword. With frost and snow as my sword, I dare to be the enemy of the world. I give you quality, and you give me support and understanding, okay? Chapter 111. A sword rang out. A long sword made of frost and snow appeared in Chunshi's hand. The blade was as thin as a cicada's wing. It could take a life with a light stroke. However, the sword was made of ice. In terms of hardness, it was not even comparable to glass. It could shatter into pieces with a casual touch. However, when the sword appeared, Third Uncle's expression changed abruptly. His old face was filled with shock. Divine arts. You've already stepped into the heavenly master realm at such a young age. A martial artist who sat on his crotch was called a grandmaster. A necromancer who had divine arts was called a heavenly master. Both of them were titles, but the meaning they represented was completely different from one another. The great Tao was like mercury flowing down the ground. No matter which path one took, they would reach the same end in the end. Therefore, if the two were compared, a heavenly master was in existence 2 whole realms higher than a grandmaster. Third Uncle sized up Chunshi with surprise and uncertainty. No matter how he looked at him, this man was about the same age as Qin Ruoying. However, he was actually an illuminating god necromancer. Third Uncle was still in shock and uncertainty. However, Chunshi took another step forward and shouted coldly, Who's coming? Who's coming? Who dares to come? He stood proudly with his sword. With frost and snow as his sword, his aura suddenly rose. It was as if an ordinary young man had suddenly become a peerless swordsman who looked down on the world. A cyclone suddenly appeared in the sky above the courtyard. The wind and snow were also expelled from the courtyard by that invisible cyclone. Even the snow stopped falling in this courtyard. The martial Tao was about aura. When facing an enemy, if you lost your aura, you had already lost by 3 points. Chunshi's aura was so strong that it was overbearing. Third Uncle, on the other hand, couldn't figure out his background. However, the old man was very cunning. Since he could not figure out his background, he immediately looked behind him. He did not say anything. A middle-aged man immediately walked out. This middle-aged man was muscular, and only wore a single shirt in the middle of winter. After walking out of the crowd, he spat on the ground and said disdainfully, How dare you be so impudent here you? However, before he could finish his sentence, Chunshi interrupted him. Without even looking at the man, he coldly said, You're not worthy. The man was taken aback. He was so angry that his entire face was distorted. But at this time, Chunshi suddenly waved his arm, and an invisible force suddenly shot out. The man immediately spat out a mouthful of blood, and was sent flying. Zhao Laosi, are you okay? If the person behind him hadn't caught him in time, he would have fallen heavily to the ground. Zhao Laosi kept spitting out blood and couldn't say a word. From the looks of it, he must have suffered severe internal injuries. Take him to Miracle Dr. Wang. Third Uncle only glanced at Zhao Laosi, then turned his head to look at Chunshi. At this moment, his expression finally became serious. Who's next? Chunshi took another step forward and said coldly. Although his words were directed at everyone in the courtyard, his gaze was on Third Uncle. Under normal circumstances, Chunshi wouldn't use a sword. The reason why he took the sword before the battle today was to seize the opportunity for himself. This old man wasn't simple. This village was full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Chunxi was proud, but not arrogant. Those below the Golden Core realm were ants. But if a few Golden Core realm cultivators really appeared, it would be troublesome. After all, he was still severely injured and had yet to recover. Moreover, his wife and children were here. Once he struck, he would kill until they were terrified. Chunxi held his sword and walked slowly in the direction of the courtyard. Some of the weaker cultivators immediately ran out of the courtyard when they saw that the situation wasn't good. "Young man, you're so spirited." Third uncle finally spoke. He chuckled and looked at Chunxi thoughtfully. Then he shook his head and sighed. "Fine, let this old man fight you." As soon as he finished speaking, third uncle suddenly attacked. Energy surged all over his body, and he suddenly slapped his palm toward Chunxi. His palm was like a rainbow piercing through the sun, aiming directly at Chunxi's head. Third uncle's action was no different from a sneak attack, which was despised by others. The reason why he did this was because he wasn't completely confident that he could defeat Chunxi. It could only be said that Chunxi's performance was too strong, so he didn't dare to be arrogant in front of Chunxi. "Chunxi, watch out." Just as third uncle attacked, Qin Shiweching, who had been released by Chunxi, suddenly shouted. Third uncle has already cultivated the supreme force. He's above the master realm. However, third uncle's movements were extremely fast. As soon as she spoke, third uncle had already slapped toward Chunxi's head. He chose a very clever position. He was standing in front and left of Chunxi. Chunxi was holding a sword in his right hand, and his left side was wide open, full of flaws. Looking at Chunxi, who was so close to him, a cold light flashed in third uncle's eyes. He could even imagine what kind of scene would occur after this palm strike. A Taoist master? Within 10 steps, I'll kill you like killing a chicken. Third uncle's eyes flashed with a trace of fierceness. He was not a kind man. So after this attack he didn't think of holding back at all. But at this moment, Chunxi suddenly disappeared in front of him. Third uncle was stunned and could no longer maintain his calmness. His expression changed greatly. Like an old crane flapping its wings, he immediately tried to escape. However, how could Chunxi let him go? His sword moved according to his will, and the long sword made of frost and snow suddenly pierced third uncle's chest. The first move of the moonlight sword technique. One move, hidden void. Before the sword was out, the sword chi returned to one, hidden and not released. As soon as the sword momentum was released, in an instant, it was like a long river hanging upside down, soaring into the sky. The tip of the sword first pierced through third uncle's protective shield, which could only be condensed by a martial artist in the gang realm. The so-called impenetrable protective shield was like a glass cover at this moment, and was immediately pierced by Chunxi's sword tip. In the blink of an eye, it turned into white gas and dissipated in all directions. Third uncle retreated quickly. He was even faster than when he came, and in the blink of an eye, he had already rushed out of the courtyard. Escape. This person was too terrifying. Unfortunately, that sword was even faster. One move, hidden void. As soon as the sword move was released, it would return after drinking blood. Third uncle was still in midair, but Chunxi's sword seemed to turn into a ray of light, directly shooting toward third uncle's back. Puff! The sword chi went straight into third uncle's flesh, and his body exploded into a cloud of blood. Then, like a wild goose that was shot by a hunter, he fell heavily to the bottom of the hill. There was a dead silence. Even Qin Ruoying was frightened by Chunxi's killing intent, and could not help but reach out to grab his clothes. No wonder he wanted Nian to sleep. It turned out that he was going to kill third uncle. A few of the smarter ones immediately reacted, shouting third uncle's name, and rushed out to look for him. This change came too suddenly. The two people who were fighting Qin Yongyan and Big Cat immediately jumped out of the battle and retreated directly to the courtyard door. Big Cat wanted to chase after them, but Chunxi stopped him in time. Big Cat, come back. Meow. Qin Yongyan stared at his cheap son-in-law in front of him, dumbfounded. That was third uncle, and Gang Realm Great Grandmaster. He could not even take one move of his sword. Chunxi did not notice his father-in-law's expression. T. A burst of laughter suddenly sounded. The person hadn't arrived yet, but his appearance could already be heard from his voice. He was like an old and kind grandfather looking at his naughty grandson. His eyes were full of a kind and doting feeling. "Young man, you're so arrogant." As soon as he finished speaking, a figure suddenly appeared in the sky above the ancestral hall. It was an old man in white training clothes. He looked old and clumsy, leaning on an elm walking stick. He slowly walked in the direction of the courtyard. Yes, he was walking. However, he was walking in the air at an altitude of 40 to 50 meters. That's great-granduncle. Zhao Xinghuai stared at the old man in a daze. After rubbing his eyes hard, he suddenly knelt down and shouted, "Greetings to great-granduncle." As soon as he said that, everyone outside the courtyard knelt on the ground and shouted, "Greetings to great-granduncle." Great-granduncle was the village's legend. No one knew exactly how old great-granduncle was, and no one knew exactly how high his seniority was. That was why even third uncle could only call him great-granduncle. Great-granduncle hadn't appeared for decades, so many people thought that he had passed away. They didn't expect to see great-granduncle again today. Chen Shi's brows furrowed slightly. He felt very uncomfortable, because he couldn't stand this kind of old bastard who was still unwilling to turn into dust despite the decadent feudal tradition. "I don't care what Elysium or Xiannu you are. If you want to burn Yingying to death, then you're going against me." Thinking of this, Chen Shi couldn't help but snort angrily. Then he picked up his sword and walked towards the old man step by step. It was as if he was playing in Mount Tai. With every step Chen Shi took, it was as if he was stepping on a new level. However, there was nothing under his feet. He was walking in the air. He was ascending to the sky. Grand Elder Gongzheng greeted the juniors outside the courtyard with a smile. When he saw Chen Shi walking in the air from the courtyard, the kind smile on his face slowly disappeared. "Celestial being?" Great-granduncle leaned on his walking stick and couldn't help but ask in surprise. "You've already become a celestial being?" Above the celestial master level was the condensing pill. Only after the condensing pill could one become a celestial being. Chen Shi walked in the air and stood in front of great-granduncle. One was old and one was young. One was holding a sword, and the other was leaning on a walking stick. They just stood in the air. Chen Shi acted as if he didn't hear great-granduncle's exclamation. Instead he asked, "I only have one question." Great-granduncle took a deep look at him, then laughed and said, "Please go ahead." Chen Shi's current state had forced him to put this young man in the same position as himself. Hearing this, Chen Shi suddenly laughed. "You beat the young one, and the old one comes." Chapter 113. Frost and snow were the swords, and the swords were the array. Hundreds of frost swords were densely inserted into the ground, surrounding Qin Ruoying, who was holding the little fellow. If one looked from the sky, one would find that these swords were not randomly inserted. The position of each frost sword contained a certain truth of heaven and earth. Qin Yongyan was his father-in-law, and Qin Xueqing was his sister-in-law. These were all people closely related to Yingying, so Chen Shi conveniently included them. In this big village, Yingying seemed to have only 2 relatives left. Setting up an array required distraction. And this was actually the real purpose of great-granduncle. Would he really be so kind as to remind Chen Shi to protect his wife and child? Obviously not. Great-granduncle was just breaking Chen Shi's momentum. He grasped the lifeline and broke the momentum with one word. Even a snake should be hit where it hurts, let alone a person. In great-granduncle's eyes, Chen Shi came leisurely in the sky with a shocking sword momentum. Chen Shi's own momentum had reached the realm of perfection. Just like Shimen Chueshua on the top of the Forbidden City, one man with one sword, his momentum was natural. But Chen Shi was not Shimen Chueshua after all. He was more like Yi Guqing with a fatal weakness. That was Yingying and Niannian. Great-granduncle cleverly grasped Chen Shi's weakness. So he broke his momentum. Great-granduncle couldn't figure out Chen Shi's realm. But that was not important. If the winner could be decided only by the realm, then what was the point of fighting? They could just compete with whose realm was higher. A lion would use all its strength to hunt a rabbit. If a warrior at the peak of obvious strength used the right method, he might be able to kill a warrior at peak strength. That was martial arts. In a battle between masters, the winner could be seen in an instant. So when Chen Shi was distracted to set up a defensive array for Qin Ruoying, great-granduncle took action. He suddenly grabbed his walking stick and swung it at Chen Shi. This dragon-headed walking stick was his weapon. With the support of granduncle's strength, the dragon head at the top of the crutch seemed to come alive. It was like a dormant black dragon had suddenly woken up. Wrapped in a streak of white light, it suddenly blasted toward Chen Shi with shocking power. Hibernating dragon, roaring thousand mountains. The clouds in the 8 directions moved, and the 4 directions surrendered. Granduncle's sneak attack was very sudden. Chen Shi had turned around to set up the formation, and had not yet turned around. He struck out with his staff, aiming at the back of Chen Shi's head. It was no different from Third Uncle's previous behavior. However, he was a little smarter than Third Uncle. He knew that he had to break the momentum and cause his opponent's mind to be disturbed before he made his move. However, no matter how astute great-granduncle was, he was still wrong about one thing. That was, he had underestimated Chen Shi's strength. It was not an overestimation, but a far underestimation. The obvious strength stage could indeed kill the transforming strength stage. However, it was impossible for a golden core cultivator to kill a semi-god realm warrior. Even if he was just a semi-god realm warrior, who had not recovered from a serious injury. Therefore, just as the dragon-headed walking stick was about to hit Chen Shi, a long sword suddenly appeared in front of Granduncle. Ding! The frost sword went from bottom to top. The seemingly fragile blade blocked Granduncle's dragon-headed walking stick. Because they were too close, Granduncle could even see every fine line on the frost sword. He widened his eyes. The energy in his body was surging, and his sleeves were fluttering. Just a little bit more. He would be able to break this frost sword soon. However, no matter how hard Granduncle tried, the frost sword was like a pillar holding up the sky, between him and Chen Shi. At this time, Chen Shi had finally finished setting up the formation. With the infusion of true essence, the blade of the frost sword suddenly burst out a strong golden light. He turned to look at Granduncle. Since you are tired of living, I'll send you on your way. As soon as he finished speaking, Granduncle was shocked. He suddenly realized that a huge threat was coming. Seeing this, Granduncle immediately withdrew his dragon-headed walking stick, and then struck a pose. The dragon tail was entrenched, the dragon head was raised to the sky, and he held the walking stick in front of him with both hands. The guard technique, coiling dragon in the abyss, motionless as a mountain. And the moment he struck the pose, the tip of the sword condensed by frost and snow also stabbed toward him. A sword hidden in the air. Why did Chen Shi use a sword? That was because the true essence he had accumulated was still too little. It could even be said that it was pitiful. He was like a professional landlord who had 10 million in cash, but chose to buy a house with all of it. After that, he lived by collecting rent, and he was just a beginner. Therefore, he had to be careful with his spending. He had to be calculative even when buying groceries. He didn't look like a multi-millionaire at all. Save money, buy a house, collect rent, save money, buy another house, collect more rent. This was a qualified professional landlord. The moonlight sword technique was comparable to the 49 styles of heaven divination. Although it didn't have many moves and had many limitations, it had an advantage that the 49 styles of heaven divination couldn't compare to. That was the sword technique consumed less true essence. And this was the fundamental reason why Granduncle could still jump in front of Chen Shi until now. The long rainbow spirit, a sword hidden in the air. The sword light turned into a golden light, and instantly blasted toward Granduncle. This sword was coming menacingly. Granduncle immediately clenched the dragon staff with both hands and roared, "Rise!" His words were the law. A black coiling dragon seemed to be substantial. It transformed into a roar, and was about to pounce. Entering the Tao with martial arts, comprehending the truth of heaven and earth, and integrating the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Granduncle was actually a rare peerless master in the world to have practiced martial arts to this level. But it was a pity. The person he met today was Chen Shi, a person who belonged to this world, but also didn't belong to this world. Therefore, when the golden light hit the black dragon was immediately shaken to the point of almost falling. At the critical moment, Grand Uncle roared angrily. The primordial chi around him suddenly soared. This also made the black dragon, which should have been on the verge of falling, actually take shape again. He actually took this sword head-on. Chun-Shi looked at him with some surprise, but his hand movements didn't stop. Since he took one sword, let's take another. No. It should be 100 swords. The second move of the moonlight sword technique. 100 swords, no end. Chun-Shi raised his long sword and pointed at Grand Uncle from afar. A gust of cold wind that almost made people unable to open their eyes suddenly blew. In the wind and snow all over the sky, 100 frost swords condensed and took shape beside Chun-Shi one after another. Although the number wasn't as many as when he set up the array just now, each sword faintly glowed with golden light. 100 swords floated in the air, as if to illuminate the whole world. The man stood in the air, without any emotion in his eyes. This was the last scene that great-granduncle would see in his life. No, golden light bloomed. It was enough to wipe out some of the darkness in the world. After the 100 swords flew out, Chun-Shi turned around and flew back to the courtyard. He let go of the frost sword in his hand gently. The invincible divine sword turned back into the snowflakes all over the sky, sprinkling toward this small ancient village. Chun-Shi landed slowly by the side of Qin Ruoying. He reached out his hand and caressed her pretty face, which was a bit cold due to the wind and snow. He then took her hand slowly and said to her gently, "Let's go home." The initial subscriptions of this book have reached 13,000 so far. It will soon surpass The Path Toward Heaven and catch up with Mu Shen. Thank you, I love you. Chapter 114. The little fellow had a very, very long dream. In that dream, there were wonderful magical castles, lively and cute cartoon dolls, and colorful and brilliant magic. It was a very, very long dream. She wanted to ride the roller coaster, but Papa didn't take her. Sister Chang-yi was the best. It was Sister Chang-yi who took her to ride the roller coaster. There were many people riding the roller coaster. The little fellow had ridden it with Sister Chang-yi several times, but she still hadn't gotten tired of it. Where's Papa? The little fellow suddenly thought of Papa, so she sat on the roller coaster and looked around for Papa. Nian Nian. Daddy is here. The little fellow looked in the direction of the voice and suddenly saw her father flying in the sky and greeting her. Papa. She immediately jumped up excitedly and threw herself into her father's arms. Daddy will take you to the sky to pick the stars, okay? Okay. She sat in her father's arms and looked at the roller coaster below her getting smaller and smaller. It flew higher and higher, but she didn't feel afraid at all. Suddenly, a white cloud floated in front of the little fellow's eyes. She pulled off a piece and held it high in her hand. She looked at her father and asked, "Papa, is this a cloud?" "Yes, try it. Is it delicious?" Hearing this, the little fellow immediately took the white cloud and took a bite. The sweet taste immediately made her smile until her eyes narrowed. Delicious. Papa, eat it. Nian Nian is so obedient. Delicious. The father and daughter ate the cloud. Suddenly, she woke up from the dream. The light was a little dazzling. The little fellow closed her eyes tightly and moaned for a long time before she finally opened her eyes. Nian Nian, you're awake? A woman's voice came into her ears. The little fellow sat up with the help of the woman, with a confused expression on her face. She rubbed her eyes and glanced at the woman. Then she suddenly burst into tears with a wah. Papa. Papa. Qin Ruoying was stunned. Seeing this, Chun-Shi immediately walked over from the side. He gently hugged the little fellow in his arms and kept comforting her. Daddy is here. Daddy is here. Hearing that familiar voice, the little fellow slowly stopped crying. She pouted and hugged Chun-Shi tightly. It was as if he had been greatly wronged. After comforting her for a while, Chun-Shi saw that she was no longer crying. He picked her up and said with a smile, "Let's go. Daddy will take you to wash your face." The little fellow lay on top of Chun-Shi, staring blankly at Qin Ruoying with red eyes. Qin Ruoying was also looking at her. However, The expression on Qin Ruoying's face was very sad. When she saw Chen Shi pick up the little fellow from the bed, she immediately stood up from the chair and walked to the side to make way for Chen Shi. When Chen Shi saw her sad expression, he immediately reached out and patted her arm. He smiled and comforted her. Give the child some time. Okay. Qin Ruoying nodded and forcibly swallowed back the tears that had already welled up in her eyes. Chen Shi took the little fellow to the bathroom. She also wanted to follow and see how Chen Shi washed the little fellow. But as soon as she took a step, she immediately stepped back. There was the sound of running water in the bathroom. The little fellow bit the toothbrush and said something to Chen Shi in a muffled voice. All of a sudden, Chen Shi laughed. Qin Ruoying really wanted to hear what they were talking about, so after hesitating for a moment, she quietly leaned toward the bathroom. However, she was neither a cultivator nor a necromancer. She was not even a martial artist. So no matter how hard she tried, she could not hear what the little fellow was saying. The sound of running water stopped abruptly. Qin Ruoying hurriedly returned to the original place, as if she had never moved. After washing up, the little fellow finally woke up. Chen Shi took her out of the bathroom and went directly to Qin Ruoying. Nian Nian, Daddy is going to cook. Mommy will play with you, okay? Hearing this, the little fellow could not help but hesitate. She looked up at Chen Shi and then at Qin Ruoying. After serious consideration, she nodded gently and said very obediently, okay. Good girl. Go let mommy watch cartoons with you. With that, Chen Shi pinched her little face and then handed her hand to Qin Ruoying. Qin Ruoying seemed to have not recovered yet. Seeing this, Chen Shi smiled gently and said, Ying, watch cartoons with her for a while. After that, Chen Shi held the little fellow in one hand and Qin Ruoying in the other. After putting the mother and daughter's hands together, he said with a smile, Daddy is going to cook. I'll call you when it's ready. The first sentence was said to the little fellow, but the second sentence was said to Qin Ruoying. After that, Chen Shi winked at Qin Ruoying. Everything was understood without words. The mother and daughter watched Chen Shi walk out of the west wing. After he gently closed the door, Qin Ruoying, like a puppet with a spring wound, asked the little fellow tentatively, Nian Nian, Mommy, can I hold you? The little fellow nodded, raised her little hand and said sweetly, Mommy, hold me. Hearing this, Qin Ruoying suddenly looked a little excited. She quickly squatted down and gently took the little fellow into her arms. Then she held the little fellow's butt and picked her up. It was different from the excitement of reunion. At this moment, Qin Ruoying's heart was only filled with joy. Joy from the bottom of her heart. She was so happy that she couldn't help crying. Nian Nian, what cartoon do you want to watch? Mommy will find it for you. It seemed that she didn't want the child to see her crying. So after Qin Ruoying put the little fellow on the bed, she immediately turned around to look for the remote control. While looking for the remote control, she secretly wiped the tears off her face. Qin Ruoying pretended to look for the remote control. The little fellow waited for a while and seemed to be a little impatient, so she lay on the bed and looked for it herself. Sure enough, the remote control was lying quietly on the bedside table. She picked up the remote control and immediately giggled. Here it is. Here it is. As she spoke, she skillfully pressed the button to turn on the TV. The channel was a children's channel, and it was playing her favorite cartoon. So she immediately turned to the other corner of the room and shouted, Big cat! Big cat! Come on. Let's watch the cartoon. She didn't know where the big cat was hiding just now. But after hearing the little fellow's call, it immediately came out, turned into a black shadow, and drilled into the little fellow's arms, and obediently watched the cartoon with her. Qin Ruoying turned around and looked at her daughter who was holding the remote control, and holding the big cat in her arms. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. The little fellow waited for a while. Seeing that she was still in a daze, she immediately shouted to her, Mommy! Sit here. As she spoke, she patted the quilt beside her. Qin Ruoying sat on the edge of the bed, but the little fellow seemed to be a little dissatisfied, so she immediately pouted and said, Mommy wants to sit here. Hearing that, Qin Ruiying immediately took off her shoes and sat beside the little fellow. After seeing that she sat down, the little fellow nodded in satisfaction, then directly raised her arm and drilled into her arms like a cat. Mommy, watch the cartoon with me. Okay. Mommy will watch it with you. Outside the house. After hearing the conversation between the mother and daughter, Chunshi couldn't help but smile slightly. After laughing for a while, he felt relieved and walked to the kitchen. Chapter 115. The courtyard of the Qin family suddenly became lively. There were not many dishes at home, so Chunshi went to the supermarket first, and then went straight to the kitchen with bags of food. In this family, only he and Ninian were outsiders. It was also because of these two outsiders that the atmosphere in the house became a little strange. Qin Ruiying and the little fellow were watching cartoons in the west wing. Qin Xueqing was making a phone call in the east wing, and Qin Yongyan was alone in the study next to the main room, doing something unknown. There were more people at home, so the dinner naturally had to be more sumptuous. So when Chunshi returned to the kitchen, he started 3 stoves at the same time. He washed and prepared the vegetables, shredded and peeled them, and cooked the soup and stir-fried the vegetables. He was very busy. After all, he did not have 3 heads and 6 arms, so he simply used the sword controlling technique and the fire controlling technique, preparing to cook this family banquet with the means of immortal cultivators. Yes, family banquet. Chunshi was brought up by his grandfather since he was a child. Unfortunately, his grandfather died early, so he had no relatives in this world for a long time. When he was in college, he finally had a lover. It also made him understand what it meant to care. Now his lover became his family. Therefore, her family had become his family. He had a family. It was a kind of relationship that was not related by blood, but was comparable to blood. A person who had no family suddenly had a family, so he cherished it more than anyone else. Spice goose platter, stewed bird's nest with rock sugar, small bowl of golden hook fin, steamed lobster, braised eel, dragon tongue, abalone with snail meat, liaoning ginseng with sauce, steamed crab, steamed eastern star spot, caterpillar fungus stewed with flour glue, 10 dishes, all of which were main dishes. Ying liked to drink vegetable soup, so Chunshi specially made a nourishing vegetable soup for her in winter. Chunshi scooped up a spoonful with an iron spoon and tasted it. Well, it tasted good. As for the little fellow, she was not picky. As long as it was made by her father, she liked to eat it, so it was easier to clean up. Because he didn't know what his father-in-law and sister-in-law liked, Chunshi couldn't cook a dish for them for the time being. Because it was winter, before 6 o'clock in the evening, the sky of Shangjing was completely covered by the curtain of night. Tens of thousands of lanterns lit up the sky without night. 10 li of beautiful gauze filled with fragrance. The lights in the Qin family's courtyard were also turned on. There were many dishes today, so they could only eat in the main hall. After placing the bowls and chopsticks in order, Chunshi shouted towards the door, "The food is ready. Come and eat first." The little girl heard her father's shouts. Therefore, she immediately jumped out of Qin Ruiying's arms and stood on the bed, jumping up and down as she said smugly, "Mama, it's time to eat. I'm hungry. I want to eat." "Okay, let's go. Mommy will take you to eat." Qin Ruiying carried the little fellow out of the west wing. When he arrived at the main hall, he was immediately shocked by the sumptuous dinner in front of him. "You did it." She put down the little fellow, then pointed at the big meal in front of her, and couldn't help but ask suspiciously. Chunshi used to cook, but he only knew how to cook a few simple home-cooked dishes. He didn't even think about complicated dishes. Take the table in front of her as an example. Even if Chunshi told her that he bought it outside, she would probably believe him immediately. "How is it? Is my cooking okay? You've improved." Qin Ruiying quietly glanced at the little fellow. Seeing that she was only focused on the dishes on the table, she quickly kissed Chunshi on the face. Being rewarded by his wife, Chunshi immediately smiled proudly. He didn't put in so much effort in vain. It was okay. Although they hadn't seen each other for a long time, the tacit understanding between them had become even closer. The two of them stood in front of the main hall and waited for a while. Seeing that the little fellow was a little impatient, They made a move almost at the same time. Without any prior discussion, Qin Ruoying pointed to the study on the right, and Chen Shi pointed to the east wing on the left. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying immediately smiled and said, "Telepathy." Chen Shi said, "Telepathy." After that, both of them couldn't help laughing. Qin Ruoying turned and walked to the study. "I'll call Dad first." After she left, Chen Shi touched the little fellow's head and said, "Nian Nian, good girl. Don't steal food. Dad will call Auntie to eat. We'll eat when Grandpa and Auntie arrive." "Okay. I won't steal food." The little fellow nodded heavily while chewing the spiced goose. "Naughty." Chen Shi gently pinched her little face, which was bulging like a hamster, and walked out of the main hall with a smile. The light in the east wing was on. Qin Xueqing had been hiding in the room since she came home. No one knew what she was doing. Chen Shi knocked on the door, but she didn't respond. He couldn't just barge into his sister-in-law's room. Therefore, Chen Shi waited outside for a while and shouted outside the door, "It's time to eat." He didn't call her that, because he really hadn't thought about how to call his sister-in-law. If he called her by her full name, it would seem too distant. If he called her by her name with his current relationship with his sister-in-law, he was afraid that he would be slapped in the face. Therefore, Chen Shi thought about it and simply didn't even call her by her name. After waiting for a while, the door opened. Qin Xueqing walked out of the east wing and stood in front of Chen Shi. She looked at Chen Shi thoughtfully, but still didn't say a word. Seeing this, Chen Shi smiled and said to her, "It's time to eat." After that, he turned and walked to the main hall. He had already said what he wanted. It was up to her whether she wanted to eat or not. Looking at Chen Shi's back, Qin Xueqing hesitated for a moment, then suddenly said, "The leader wants to see you. He hopes that you can come with me to the headquarters in Shangjing." Chen Shi didn't turn around, as if he didn't hear her. Qin Xueqing was a little anxious and immediately wanted to chase after him. But at this moment, Chen Shi suddenly stopped in his tracks. He leaned to the side and glanced back at Qin Wanqing. Then he said coolly, "I can give you face and let him see me." After that, he turned and walked into the main hall. Outside the study, Qin Ruoying gently knocked on the door. After waiting for 2 seconds, she didn't hear any response, so she pushed the door open and went in. "Dad, it's time to eat." Qin Yongyan sat in the chair and stared at the desk in front of him. No one knew what he was thinking. Qin Ruoying walked to his side. After glancing at the rice paper on the table, she read out the words he wrote on the paper. "The heavenly gate is broken and the Chu River is opened. The blue water flows back to the east. The green mountains on both sides of the river face each other. The lonely sail comes from the horizon." The words were good, and the poem was good. After reading, Qin Ruoying gently put her hand on her father's shoulder. After a little hesitation, she asked uncertainly, "Dad, are you blaming me?" Qin Yongyan didn't say anything. Qin Ruoying stood behind him silently. The expression on her face became more and more sad. Suddenly, Qin Yongyan let out a deep sigh. Then he crumpled the rice paper on the table into a ball and threw it into the wastebasket next to him. "As long as it's reasonable, I'll agree to it. Do you understand?" The little guy was stunned for a moment. After hesitating for a moment, she nodded gently and replied weakly with a pout, "Okay, I won't lie. Good girl." Chen Shi pinched her little face. At this time, Qin Xueqing also walked into the main hall. After seeing her sit down, Chen Shi turned his head and looked in the direction of the study. To be honest, he still hadn't decided what kind of attitude he should use to face Qin Yongyan. Since ancient times, the relationship between father and son-in-law was slightly better than the relationship between mother and daughter-in-law. But this didn't mean that there wouldn't be conflicts between father and son-in-law. As the saying goes, the more a mother-in-law looks at her son-in-law, the more she likes him. However, there was no uniform way for a father-in-law to look at his son-in-law. Perhaps it was because mature men were more reserved, so they would hide some of their thoughts in their hearts and wouldn't make a conclusion easily. Even if they liked or disliked him, the father-in-law wouldn't easily express it. Before arriving home, Qin Ruoying proposed to eat outside, but Chunxi said that he wanted to let her try his cooking. Qin Ruoying couldn't persuade him, so there was this sumptuous meal in front of her. In fact, eating wasn't the main point. Meeting Yingying's father officially was the main point of this dinner. Chunxi and Qin Yongyan, this father-in-law and son-in-law, had a very subtle relationship. Nianyan was already 4 years old when Qin Yongyan just found out that he had a granddaughter. And as his son-in-law, Chunxi showed his invincible power in the village in the morning, showing his absolute power that was beyond imagination. Everything that happened. What kind of experience would Qin Yongyan have? Chunxi couldn't imagine it from his perspective. After all, he wasn't involved. Anyway, what's done is done, and he had finished eating. His father-in-law couldn't possibly ask him to spit it out, right? After waiting for a while, Qin Ruoying and Qin Yongyan arrived. As soon as they walked into the main hall, Chunxi was about to get up and greet them. Like Qin Xueqing, Chunxi still hadn't figured out how to address Qin Yongyan. Yingying wasn't his legal wife after all. They were already engaged, so it wouldn't be good to call him dad directly. Nianyan was already 4 years old, and she was still calling him grandpa sweetly. But he was calling Qin Yongyan uncle. Wouldn't that seem too distant? How should he address him? It was so annoying. Even an immortal would worry about such trivial matters. While Chunxi was still worrying, Qin Yongyan's reaction immediately eased Chunxi's awkwardness. Qin Yongyan followed Qin Ruoying into the main hall. Seeing that Chunxi was about to get up, he immediately stopped Chunxi, and then said with a smile, "You've worked hard. Sit down." After that, he directly sat down at the head of the table in front of the red sandalwood carving table. After waiting for so long, the children must be hungry. Let's have a taste. Is the master's cooking as good as his swordsmanship? Qin Yongyan said with a smile, but quietly made a small joke with Chunxi. As soon as he said that, Qin Xueqing's hand, which was about to pick up the chopsticks, suddenly trembled. She was a Wu Dao guru, but now even holding a pair of chopsticks was trembling. It was easy to imagine how complicated her feelings were right now. After all, she wasn't as shrewd and calm as Qin Yongyan. After secretly glancing at Chunxi, she picked up the chopsticks and directly started to eat. At this time, Chunxi got up and pushed the small bowl of golden wings to Qin Yongyan, and then said with a smile, "Sorry to make a fool of myself. This small bowl of golden wings is my specialty. Would you like to have a taste?" "Haha, then I won't stand on ceremony. Please." A seemingly ordinary family feast began amidst this harmonious atmosphere. During the banquet, Qin Yongyan kept chatting with Chunxi about various trivial matters. Qin Ruoying was responsible for serving the little girl. Only Qin Xueqing was restless and felt very awkward. After finishing the rice quickly, she immediately got up and said, "I'm full. Uncle, sister, take your time." After that, Qin Xueqing turned to leave. However, at this time, Qin Yongyan suddenly stopped her and asked with a smile, "Xueqing, did you talk to your father on the phone?" Qin Xueqing nodded and replied, "Yes, they will come back after a while." "Oh, okay." Qin Yongyan nodded, but then suddenly pointed to her seat and said with a smile, "There are guests at home. You can be considered as half the host here. Don't be in a hurry to leave. Sit down for a while." "Ah." Qin Xueqing looked at Qin Yongyan with a little surprise. Seeing that he was looking at her with a smile, Qin Xueqing couldn't help but hesitate for a moment, and then reluctantly sat down again. Chunxi glanced at Qin Xueqing. After seeing her sit down, he suddenly said to Qin Yongyan, "Uncle Qin, sorry for calling you like this." Hearing this, Qin Yongyan immediately turned to look at Chunxi. He still had a smile on his face. He just looked at Chunxi with a smile and didn't say anything. Seeing this, Chunxi also smiled. He gently held Qin Ruoying's hand under the table, and then said with a smile, "Nianyan is already 4 years old, but I still owe Yingying a romantic wedding. So I hope to hold this wedding for her under your witness. What do you think? Can you?" Before Qin Yongyan could answer, Qin Ruoying had already turned her head and looked at Chunxi in a daze. Wedding? She really never thought about it. Chunxi had actually been keeping this matter in her heart. Drinking wine and growing old together. Chapter 117. Wedding. Qin Ruoying was stunned. That was something she had never dreamed of. Therefore, her first reaction was to avoid the trouble. But when she felt the warmth from Chen Shi's hand, after hesitating for a while, she swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth. Which girl didn't yearn for love? Which teenager didn't fall in love? 20 years had passed, and she was almost 30 years old. Her daughter was already 4 years old. Now that Chen Shi suddenly said that he wanted to hold a wedding for her. Why did it sound so awkward? It was very embarrassing. Oh? Have you decided when to hold it? As he spoke, Qin Yongyan looked at Qin Ruoying with a faint smile. I can do it any time, it's up to Yingying. With that, Chen Shi turned to look at Qin Ruoying. Me? How would I know? Seeing that her father and husband were looking at her, Qin Ruoying hurriedly lowered her head, looking a little embarrassed. Chen Shi was stunned for a moment. Then he seemed to have thought of something and couldn't help but laugh. He gently squeezed Qin Ruoying's hand, then said to Qin Yongyan, I was dictatorial. I should have discussed with Yingying first. Hearing this, Qin Yongyan immediately nodded and laughed. Then you have a good discussion. Let me know when you are sure. After saying that, he continued to eat his food. His attitude was a little strange. Could it be? Father-in-law had already acquiesced to the fact that what was done, so he was mentally prepared in advance? Chen Shi thought for a while, then threw this question to the back of his mind. He respected his father-in-law, but he wouldn't let his father-in-law's attitude affect his decision. The only person who could really affect his decision was Yingying. Chen Shi glanced at Qin Ruoying. He felt that her palm was a little sweaty, so he couldn't help but gently stroke it. There are thousands of people in the world, but do not seek them for the fleeting clouds. A person is like a rainbow, meeting the top will be known. Treasure it as you go. After dinner, Qin Yongyan went straight to his study. Seeing him leave, Qin Xueqing ran back to her room in the east wing, as if she was running away. Seeing this, the couple couldn't help but look at each other and shake their heads. Forget it, let's take it slow. Making a family banquet was actually a very tiring thing. Washing vegetables and cooking was very tiring. After eating, one still had to sweep the floor, mop the dishes, and wipe the table. Therefore, housewives sometimes had a hard time. As a good man of the new era, Chen Shi had the awareness to become a house husband. Therefore, when Qin Ruoying wanted to help him clean up, she was directly pushed out by Chen Shi. He asked her to take care of the child and cultivate a good relationship with the little fellow. Shangjing is a city that never sleeps. Hohai Workers' Sports Complex and Sanlitun are all bars, nightclubs and food stalls. The door was closed, so just as it was about to jump up and open the door, Chen Shi had already opened the door for it. The big cat was stunned for a moment, and then rushed out of the west wing at a faster speed. It was not good to stay here for a long time. After the big cat left, Chen Shi picked up the little fellow and gently put her aside, then moved to Qin Ruoying's side and lay down. Qin Ruoying was lying on the bed, seeming a little nervous. As soon as Chen Shi lay down beside her, she seemed to be stimulated and suddenly sat up from the bed. After hesitating for a moment, Qin Ruoying said with some embarrassment, Nian Nian is still next to us. She's asleep. Aya. Qin Ruoying gently swatted away the devil's claws that wanted to play tricks. She bit her red lips and opened her mouth to say something, but Chen Shi had already kissed her gently. She turned around to face the flowing snow, climbing onto the bed to hug the beautiful Tsong. Mandarin ducks dancing neck to neck, jadeite encirclement. Eyebrows together bashfully, lips red and warm. Fresh and fragrant, skin smooth and jade-like. Weak and languid wrists, so tender and lovable. Beads of sweat, messy green hair. After 1,000 years of happiness, I've heard of 5 nights of poverty. The time to linger is limited, the love is hard to end. It was the beginning of a break. Yingying, do you want to try in the sky tomorrow? In the sky. Qin Ruoying was stunned for a moment, but then she shyly spat at him. Bah. How can you think of that? Shameless. We're an old married couple, what's there to be shy about? Hearing that, Qin Ruoying pretended to be angry and threatened him. I'm going to be angry. Seeing that, Chunshi immediately raised his hands to surrender. Okay, I won't say it. Humph. The two of them lingered for a while. Chunshi hugged her and suddenly asked seriously, Ying, are you looking forward to our wedding? Qin Ruoying looked at him quietly in the dark, and did not answer immediately. She gently leaned her head on Chunshi's chest. Then, with a sense of relief, she suddenly sighed and said, I didn't dare to think about it before, so I never thought about it. Thank you. Chapter 118. After the couple spent some time together, the date of the wedding was finally set. December 12th. Half a month later. There was no special meaning to it. Chunshi just wanted to do it as soon as possible, so he chose December 12th after thinking about it. 12-12-122. I want to love. It felt good and auspicious, so let's do it on that day. Qin Ruoying gave it some thought, and let him make the decision. In fact, she didn't have any special ideas, thinking that it just needed to be simple. As long as she could marry Chunshi under the witness of her father, she would have no regrets in this life. However, Chunshi also wanted to hold a romantic wedding for Ying, because he had experienced Fong Lei's high-end cruise wedding. Qin Ruoying didn't agree. Not to mention that Chunshi was all alone. Even she didn't have many relatives or friends. So even if the wedding was grand, how many guests could they invite to attend the ceremony? It was a make-up wedding anyway, so it was fine to just give her a simple blessing. Chunshi agreed with her with a smile. The next day, when the little girl woke up, the sun was already high in the sky. Chunshi leaned against the bed and looked at her with a smile. The little girl didn't seem to be awake yet. She stretched, squinted at her father next to her, and then rolled on the bed directly into Chunshi's arms to continue to sleep. The couple sat side by side on the bed, quietly looking at the little girl who was sleeping in Chunshi's arms. Suddenly, they looked at each other again. Then they both laughed. Maybe this was the happiest thing in the world. These 2 days there would be light snow from time to time. It wasn't heavy, but it was enough to make the snow pile on the ground higher and higher. The weather was good today. After the snow at night, it was sunny during the day. Qin Xueqing might feel that it was not good to eat Chunshi's food for free every day, so when Chunshi went to the kitchen, he found that she had already bought breakfast and put it in the thermal cabinet. His sister-in-law was actually a very domineering person. However, her brother-in-law was stronger than her. She was so domineering that she could no longer raise her head in front of Chunshi. Because the little fellow had gone back to sleep, it was already 9 o'clock in the morning by the time Qin Ruoying took her to wash up and get up for breakfast. Her sister-in-law was a very particular person, so the breakfast she bought was naturally not the porridge and steamed buns from the roadside stalls. He didn't know where she bought these Cantonese morning snacks, but just looking at them was enough to whet his appetite. Because they woke up too late, Qin Xueqing and Qin Yongyan had already eaten. So Chunshi directly took the breakfast back to the west wing. The little girl liked barbecued pork buns and shrimps very much. As a grandmaster of the dance stage, she had long cultivated the martial Tao from the vocal realm to the silent realm. Suddenly she moved. Her lotus steps moved slightly, and her posture was exquisite beyond compare. Light clouds danced gracefully as her sleeves fluttered in the wind. Suddenly she was as ethereal as a light cloud, and suddenly she was like a magpie startling its nest. A set of mother-child cotton palm, which was soft but firm, came out from her hands. It was not like a martial art but more like a dance. As it fluttered and danced, it was like a snow lotus blooming angrily. The little fellow who was riding the big cat and wandering around was attracted by her dance, so she immediately rode the big cat back to Chunshi's side. She looked up and asked, "Papa, is Auntie dancing?" Chunshi bent down and picked her up from the big cat, and then asked with a smile, "How is it? Is Auntie dancing well?" "Yes." The little fellow immediately nodded heavily, and suddenly said with some expectation, "I also want to learn." Hearing this, Chunshi kissed her little face and laughed. "Auntie is dancing the mortal dance." When you grow up, Papa will teach you the immortal dance and let you become a fairy like Sister Chong. Okay? Okay. Teach me, Papa. The little fellow put her arms around Chen-Shi's neck and immediately giggled. The 108 moves were soon finished. Qin Xueqing stopped and stood still. She raised her head and looked at Chen-Shi again with some expectation in her eyes. Chen-Shi did not speak immediately, because after seeing Qin Xueqing's performance, he suddenly remembered the moves that great-granduncle used when fighting with him. It was beyond the scope of martial arts. The environment of the earth was not suitable for cultivation, so martial arts itself was a deformed product under the influence of the environment. This was a dead end. There was no way ahead. However, great-granduncle had obviously found another way. Therefore, after pondering for a while, Chen-Shi looked at Qin Xueqing and said softly, "That's it. I'll think about it first and give you an answer tomorrow." Okay. Qin Xueqing looked at Chen-Shi with a complicated expression, and then turned back to her room in the east wing. After his sister left, Qin Ruoying turned to look at Chen-Shi and suddenly asked thoughtfully, "You're so powerful now, is it because of that place in your memory?" She had seen Chen-Shi's memory. Although it was only the first few years, it was enough for her to understand that there was a place called the Heavenly Jade Domain in this world. The people there were very powerful. Chen-Shi looked at Qin Ruoying. Seeing her worried look, he could not help but smile. "It's a very long story. Let's go, I'll tell you slowly." The couple brought the little fellow back to the west wing. Then, Chen-Shi told Qin Ruoying the story that had lasted for 500 years. Heavenly Jade Domain Immortal Cultivators. Heavenly Domain, Heavenly Yen Sect. Chapter 120. Immortality. It was the ultimate dream of countless people, but it was obviously impossible to achieve. Although cultivators had a long lifespan, compared to immortality, what was a few hundred years? Chen-Shi was in the deification stage, so his lifespan could reach at least 2,000 years. This also led to a problem in front of him. After all, Qin Ruoying was just a mortal. Living over 100 years old was already a long life. Chen-Shi could live for 2,000 years, but Qin Ruoying couldn't accompany him for 2,000 years. 5 years was enough for time to leave a trace of imperceptible traces on her face. Let alone 2,000 years? After going through so many hardships, he finally found his lover. Would he have to watch her wither in his arms after a few decades? Chen-Shi would never allow such a thing to happen. Absolutely not. He had no delusions about immortality. Because he knew that immortality was an unrealistic fantasy. No one could live forever, but if it was only a few decades, Chen-Shi felt that it was too little. So he wanted to help Ying borrow another 500 years from the heavens. A cultivator in the gold core stage could have a lifespan of 500 years. Therefore, the moment this idea appeared in Chen-Shi's mind, it took root and sprouted almost immediately, growing into a towering tree. He must help Ying reach the gold core stage. Although the spiritual aura of heaven and earth was thin, there were still hidden masters who were close to the gold core stage like great-granduncle. Without the inheritance of cultivators, great-granduncle could reach this step. What's more, he was holding Qin Ruoying's hand and walking. She was just a gold core. Thinking of this, Chen-Shi immediately guided Qin Ruoying to find the sense of qi. To become a cultivator, the first step was to find the sense of qi. Only after detecting the existence of the spiritual aura of heaven and earth could one use a secret method to refine the spiritual aura into one's own true essence and gather it in one's dantian. If one couldn't even detect the spiritual aura of heaven and earth, then what was the point of cultivating? The sense of qi was a mysterious feeling beyond the 5 senses. There were some talented individuals who didn't even need anyone to teach them. They could awaken their sense of qi when they were still in their infancy, and instinctively refine the qi of heaven and earth. However, such geniuses were rarely seen. Therefore, if one really wanted to talk about it, humans, who were the wisest of all living things, were inferior to demons in this aspect. For example, Big Cat. It was originally a wild leopard that lived in the mountains. One day, when it suddenly awakened its sense of qi, It relied on its instincts and slowly stepped into the spirit-gathering stage. As more and more spirit chi accumulated, the big cat naturally reached the wisdom realm. He actually wanted to let a child to try. However, the little fellow's happy's true. Daddy, I see a lot of the bubbles. She did not was. It was that she was with her eyes was with Lin. The little fellow happily stretched out her fingers and kept poking in the air. Seeing this, Chunshi was stunned. Nian Nian, this naughty little girl, could sense the chi? Because he was a little suspicious of the little fellow's feeling, Chunshi deliberately scattered his true yuan and guided her to find it. However, what Chunshi did not expect was that the little fellow could actually accurately point out the location of each ball of true yuan. It's so fun! It's so fun! The little guy closed his eyes and started to shout happily. In the darkness, she felt that there were countless glowing bubbles around her, slowly flowing around her. Chunshi withdrew his true yuan. The spiritual chi of heaven and earth was too thin. So the moment he withdrew his true yuan, the little fellow immediately lost her sense of the spiritual chi of heaven and earth. Daddy, it's gone. The bubbles are gone. The little fellow pouted and opened her eyes. Then she lay on the bed, looking for the bubbles that came out of nowhere. Chunshi looked at the little fellow silently. He would not consider letting the little fellow start cultivating for the time being. After all, Nian Nian was only a 4-year-old child, and this was not the Tianyuan world. In the future, Nian Nian would have to go to school. Chunshi did not want her to become an anomaly. An anomaly among children would be ostracized. After coaxing the little fellow to watch cartoons, Chunshi looked at Qin Ruoying. If even Nian Nian could cultivate, then there was obviously something wrong with the two sisters. At this time, Qin Ruoying had already stopped cultivating. She heard the little fellow's movements. Seeing that her daughter could immediately find the feeling that Chunshi said, Qin Ruoying's face darkened. She said sadly, "Maybe I'm too stupid." Hearing this, Chunshi sat beside her, gently held her hand and comforted her. Everything is difficult at the beginning. Children are the spirits of heaven and earth and have not been affected by the turbid chi of the world. So it's easier for them to find that feeling than adults. In order to prevent her from doubting him, Chunshi even used his sister-in-law as an example to comfort her. You're not stupid, and neither is Hua Qing. Hua Qing reached the martial Dao master realm in her 20s. She's already a rare martial arts genius in this world. Even a genius like her can't find the chi, let alone you, an ordinary person who has never cultivated before. Don't worry, don't pressure, let's take it slow. Okay, then I'll try again. After hearing Chunshi's words, Qin Ruoying immediately relaxed a lot. Even Hua Qing could not learn it. It could be seen that what Chunshi taught them must be much more difficult than martial arts. Chapter 122. The next morning, Qin Xueqing didn't buy breakfast today, so Chunshi went to the roadside stall and bought some. This time he didn't buy steamed buns, but jianbing fruits for the little fellow. The little fellow had been eating Cantonese morning snacks for 2 days. Chunshi thought that her appetite would be very picky, so he bought jianbing fruits just to let her have a taste. If she really didn't like it, he would have to cook it himself. However, what Chunshi didn't expect was that the little fellow was instantly interested in the jianbing fruits after getting them. She held the oiled paper bag, opened her mouth wide, and took a big bite. Her little face was immediately covered with a lot of sauce. The little fellow frowned and chewed hard. After chewing for a while, she suddenly handed the jianbing fruits to Chunshi and laughed. Delicious. Papa, eat it. Because of the existence of the big cat, she had now developed a good habit of sharing with others all the time. Seeing this, Chunshi smiled and touched her head. He said softly, "Good girl, you are delicious. Don't get oil all over your body." Okay. Nodding, the little fellow took the jianbing fruits and fed them to the big cat. At this time, Qinshi turned to look at Qin Ruoying. Qin Ruoying just ate a few mouthfuls casually. Now she was sitting on the bed and cultivating again. It was not right to say that she was cultivating, because she hadn't even entered the door. Now she was still at the stage of looking for qi. This was actually a very boring thing, but in order to keep up with Qinshi's pace, she had to work hard. Qinshi saw it all in her eyes. He was obviously very anxious in his heart, but he had to act as if nothing had happened, which really made him a little uncomfortable. Qinshi checked Qin Ruoying's physical condition. She was very healthy and there was no problem. Except for the lack of qi. Everything was perfect. If Qin Ruoying couldn't find qi, it was normal. In that case, it was unreasonable that Qin Xueqing couldn't find the sense of qi. She was a clasping Dan master after all. And her 5 senses were much better than normal people. She could even perfectly control her own body, down to her skin and internal organs. But even so, Qin Xueqing still couldn't feel the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. A dignified martial Dao grandmaster was actually inferior to a 4-year-old child. The more he thought about it, the more ridiculous it seemed. Qinshi was afraid that the truth would shock them, so he could only emphasize to them how difficult it was to find qi. As for Qin Yongyan, he could clearly see that there was something wrong with the two of them, so he simply hid in his room all day and silently cultivated. The morning passed quickly. Qin Ruoying, Qin Xueqing, and Qin Yongyan basically wouldn't show up except for mealtimes. The little girl was very sensible. After hearing that her mother was studying, she did not disturb her mother. Why wasn't there any movement at all? Qinshi anxiously paced back and forth in the yard. After an unknown amount of time, the little fellow slowly woke up. Qinshi hurriedly ran to buy breakfast, then helped her get up and wash up. Qin Ruoying sat on the bed and looked at Qinshi, who had finished her work. Suddenly she sighed softly. After all, he was the one who slept beside her. So no matter how well Qinshi hid it, Qin Ruoying still keenly sensed that something was wrong with him. But she didn't say anything. After a simple breakfast, she silently sat on the bed and continued cultivating. Qinshi fed her the spirit-gathering pill, indicating that she should relax, then went to find Qin Yongyan again. At this time, Qin Yongyan had already successfully cultivated a trace of true essence. Even though it was very small, it represented that he had become a true cultivator. Qinshi hesitated for a moment, but still handed the spirit-gathering pill to him. Hearing Qinshi say that it was helpful for cultivation, Qin Yongyan immediately swallowed it. The spirit-gathering pill melted in his mouth. Qin Yongyan was stunned for a moment, then hurriedly sat cross-legged. Qinshi stood next to him, silently sensing the changes in the spirit qi around him. 10 minutes later, Qinshi came to the courtyard. He looked at the west wing, then looked at the east wing. Then he turned around and looked at the main hall. The door of the main hall was wide open. From his position, he could just see the large red sandalwood table carved with dragons. On top of the table was Li Bai's gazing at the Heavenly Gate mountain. The Heavenly Gate is broken and the Chu River is opened. The blue water flows east. Suddenly, a murderous aura suddenly exploded from his body. A formless energy quickly spread out with him as the center. It was as if a stone had suddenly been dropped into a calm water surface, causing ripples to appear one after another. Crack! In the small courtyard, the blue stone slab shattered. Following that, the ground beneath his feet suddenly sank nearly a foot deep. Qinshi looked up at the sky with a gloomy face. He finally knew why. Qin Ruoying, Qin Xueqing. Qinshi felt a little scared when he thought about it. So the most important thing now was to figure out what the so-called Heavenly Gate was. After Qinshi asked this question, the main hall suddenly fell into silence. After a long time, Qin Yongyan looked at Qinshi and sighed. The Heavenly Gate is an ancient legend. According to records, it hasn't appeared for more than 100 years. It hasn't appeared for more than 100 years? Then what exactly is it? The old people in the village said that the heavenly gate is the southern heavenly gate of the heavenly court. When the heavenly gate is opened, mortals can ascend and become immortals. What a joke! Hearing this, Chunshi couldn't help but angrily scold. It's the 21st century, and there are satellites everywhere in the sky. People in the United States have even climbed to the moon. Why is this lousy village still practicing feudal superstition? It wasn't that Chunshi looked down on Earth, but it was the truth. In terms of the cultivation environment on Earth, Grand Uncle's pseudo-core state was probably the peak of the world. He hadn't even completely condensed his Jindan, let alone Yuanying. How could he want to ascend and become an immortal? This might be the biggest joke Chunshi had heard in more than 500 years. However, after hearing Chunshi's scolding, Qin Yongyan shook his head disapprovingly, but he didn't immediately reply. Chunshi was stunned for a moment, and immediately realized that he had lost his composure. He didn't know what had happened to him recently. His hostility was getting stronger and stronger, and he was becoming more and more irritable. If there was something that didn't go his way, he would lose his composure. This situation seemed to have started after he came to Shangjing. Thinking of this, Chunshi couldn't help but take a deep breath. After adjusting his emotions, he looked at Qin Yongyan again. After seeing that he had calmed down a lot, Qin Yongyan replied seriously, "That's not a joke. It's true." Chunshi was stunned. He was really confused. Could it be that the cultivators on Earth thought that a Jindan was an immortal emperor? Not to mention what kind of realm an immortal emperor was. In terms of lifespan, an immortal emperor was said to be immortal, as long as heaven and earth. How many years did a Jindan cultivator have? A mere 500 years. In the eyes of cultivators, 500 years was just a blink of an eye. It was nothing at all. Forget it, there might be a cognitive gap between him and Qin Yongyan. Chapter 124. What's a Xian Nu? Qin Xueqing couldn't help but roll her eyes when she heard this question, because she had already told Chunshi many times. Since her sister-in-law didn't want to answer, Qin Ruoying immediately explained. Xian Nu is the witch who presides over the Elysium sacrificial ceremony. The sacrificial ceremony is held once a year, similar to the ancestral worship during the new year. What are the conditions? What are the requirements to become a Xian Nu? There are no special requirements. You have to be under the age of 10, and automatically step down when you reach the age of 30. No requirements? As long as you're of the right age? Chunshi pondered for a moment. Then, as if he had thought of something, he quickly asked, "What happens after you're chosen? Do you have to go through any ceremony before you become a Xian Nu?" Ceremony? Qin Ruoying thought for a moment, then said with some uncertainty, "I can't remember clearly. I remember that on the day we became Xian Nu, we entered the ancestral hall. After entering, the clan elder asked us to make a wish. He said that every Xian Nu can make a wish." Yes. Qin Xueqing also seemed to have thought of something at this time, and immediately echoed, "I remember that my wish at that time was to become a martial Dao master." And then. Qin Xueqing was a little distressed. After thinking for a long time, she muttered, "And then I forgot." Hearing this, Chunshi couldn't help but become serious. There was a problem. When they became Xian Nu, Qin Ruoying was 8 years old, and Qin Xueqing was 6 years old. Children at this age should be able to clearly remember some of the more important things. How could she forget such a big thing as becoming the Empyrean maiden? Thinking of this, Chunshi couldn't help but turn his head to look at Qin Yongyan. Qin Yongyan seemed to know what he wanted to ask, so he directly answered, "Xian Nu make wishes in the ancestral hall. I can't go in, so I don't know what ceremony to hold before becoming a Xian Nu." Chunshi frowned slightly. After hesitating for a moment, he then turned his head to Qin Ruoying and said very seriously, "Ying, look at me and then do as I say." "Okay." Qin Ruoying was a little confused, but out of her trust in Chunshi, she immediately nodded. Then, at Chunshi's request, she turned around and looked straight into Chunshi's eyes. "Relax. Take a deep breath. Spit it out. Very good, Ying, look into my eyes." The soul-searching technique has certain side effects. Even if it is minimal, Qinshi can't use it on Qin Ruoying. Although he can't search her soul, he can try to hypnotize Qin Ruoying, and then use hypnosis to dig out the memories buried in her subconscious. Qinshi has never learned hypnosis, but he has seen the illusion of the Tianqian world, which is more advanced than hypnosis. The violent turbulence that it set off became even more violent. Zhao Xinghuai stood in the square, holding his dantian and crossing his arms in front of him. The violent flying sand and gravel kept hitting his body, causing his skin and flesh to hurt. If he continued to resist like this, he might suffer unnecessary injuries. So Zhao Xinghuai thought for a while, and had no choice but to put down his pride as a grandmaster. He suddenly lay on the ground, then covered his head with both hands, and prayed that the storm would soon subside. After a long time, the turbulence finally calmed down, and the smoke and dust dissipated. The solemn ancestral hall had been split into two, as if the middle part had been forcefully removed. It was a scene of broken walls and ruins. Zhao Xinghuai lay on the ground. After feeling that the storm had subsided, he secretly raised his head to look at the situation. Li Hoan lay not far away from him. The open space around the square was full of broken wood and gravel, and the ancestral hall was also split in half. He hesitated for a moment, then raised his head to look at the sky. That young man, holding a long sword, he looked like a god descending from the heavens, looking down on all living beings with an expressionless face. He gently landed not far in front of Zhao Xinghuai. Then his voice slowly reached Zhao Xinghuai's ears. "I don't want to kill for no reason. So I want to ask you to tell me, Xian Nu's ghost. Where is it?" These words were not directed at Zhao Xinghuai alone. His voice was very soft, but it rang in every corner of the village at the same time. The tranquility of the village was broken. Countless people came out of their rooms and rushed toward the square. Looking from the sky, it was like a piece of white paper suddenly appeared with many ants. The crowd was crowded, but no one dared to approach the square. Qinshi held a long sword, silently looking at the ancestral hall in front of him. Suddenly, a group of old men came out from the ruins of the ancestral hall. There were a total of 7 of them, all wearing white training clothes, and they were of different sizes. The leader was holding the dragon-headed walking stick of great-granduncle that day. He probably took over great-granduncle's position after his death. The 7 old men stood on the steps, looking at Qinshi from afar. After hesitating for a moment, the leader of the old men sighed softly. "You are already a heavenly being at such a young age. Why do you have to force us old bones?" Hearing this, Qinshi could not help but sneer. "Hand over the Xianin soul, and I promise not to hurt anyone." As his voice fell, the leader of the old men fell silent. The few old men beside him could not help but have a slight change in expression. Immediately after, they silently communicated with their eyes. This ancient village hid many secrets. For example, Xian Nu's ghost was actually the key to opening the divine gate.